screw that up. So you should see I'm recording, correct?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So, Doug, the very first question I have for you is, I know you were a fan of the original series. What inspired you about the original series?
Well, let's see, how old was I when the original series premiered? I guess I was 13 years old. And I was a huge science fiction person, not just a person who liked science fiction. It defined me as a kid growing up. I was huge. I mean, I had read all the science fiction classics by the time Star Trek premiered. And of course, Marvel and Stan Lee was in there. I mean, I was at the age where the Marvel stuff was being invented by Stan and Jack and those guys in like 1961 or something like that. So I was seeing all these characters happening in real time right in front of me. And I knew there was a pedigree about the types of stories that those guys were doing that you could not find in Batman and Superman. Not so much later. Later on you could, but so I was a science fiction person, and there wasn't much on television. There's so much stuff now being done all the time. Back then, it was a couple of shows. I mean, and some of them weren't very good. Of course, you had the Twilight Zone and the Outer Limits, but a show like Star Trek I loved space stuff, reading, and we were also growing up during the space race, where they were headed to the moon. So Star Trek was the first really spacey science fiction show, unless you go back to, like Captain Video or, stuff like that, Tom Corbett. And that was we're talking 50s there, and nothing in between. And then when Star Trek happened, you could tell right away that the people who were creating the show had an understanding of science fiction, and that were fans. I felt that whoever was behind the show was a fan of science fiction. It was like they got it. Plus, Roddenberry had brought in a lot of real science fiction writers, which I think turned out to be difficult because people who write novels aren't used to being told how to write their novel, And Gene was, on a television show, you got to have one guy at the top who makes sure that everything is going in the direction that they want the show to be. And for someone who is used to, writing science fiction novels, that could be difficult. Although Harlan Ellison was a science fiction, novelist, and was also working in television at the same time. So he knew what to expect, but it didn't make it any easier. I'm sure you know the stories. Oh, so did I answer that?
Oh, no, that's great. It's fine.
By the time I get to the end of it, I'm like, did I answer the question?
No, it's all good. That was great. And, oh, yeah, Harlan and Sitting Edge Forever. Oh, yeah. That's
yeah,
legendary.
That was part of the drama, especially looking back. It was fun to see that Harlan's a bomb thrower, he distinguishes himself like that everywhere he goes. And when he came onto the show, he knew. He says that Roddenberry said he wouldn't be rewritten. Maybe that's true. It's really hard to believe that anyone would. Well, maybe Gene said it just to suck him in. But he claims that when he did his Outer Limits episodes, that there was no interference at all, and perhaps not. Perhaps that was true. He enthuses about that experience and bitches quite a bit about Star Trek. But his episode, although it was significantly altered by Roddenberry, I know for a fact that he's proud of it, even though he's angry about the changes that were made. Anyway.
Well, I was going to say that's why they did the comic version of his original script and all that stuff.
Yeah, I've got the book where he, it's just he's on a tear, about the whole thing. And why not? Have fun with it. I enjoyed all of his, but I was a big Ellison fan always. And the thing, I love the stories. I love his stories, and I love his collections of stories. But I have to admit that the best part for me were the introductions, where Harlan would just go off on stuff. I think I enjoyed that even more than his stories. So anything he has to say, and I expect it to be, you know, a bomb throwing kind of screed, you know, but that's what we love him for. So, I mean, I would love it if I had been insulted by him, you know. It's like Groucho Marx. I remember Groucho had said, and he was known for, you know, being sarcastic, his character, sarcastic. And, he said he got to a point in his career where he couldn't insult anybody anymore. People expected it, and if they didn't get insulted by him, they'd feel even a little offended, you know.
Oh, that's awesome. So you created a store that I would love to have visited when you were a kid, from what I understand. Can you tell me about that? And also the poster books. I was a huge fan of those.
I mean, looking back now, we really did some stuff that's well remembered, and really when no one else was doing anything that was anything close to canon, you know. The comic books were all nothing like a show, and toys. I mean, you've seen the helmet with the spinning light on top, the Spock helmet.
Oh yeah, I love
This
that.
was the shape of the universe at that time. And when we got old enough to actually do things on our own, like the store, the Federation Trading Post. I mean, the story there is that there was Chuck and Sandy Weiss, who lived in the Bay Area in California, in Berkeley. And they opened a little shop that was just Star Trek stuff. It was purely Star Trek. And it went pretty well for them. I think there was even an article in People magazine about it. And they decided they wanted to do one in New York City. And like, how old was I? 22, maybe 22 years old. And I was living in Manhattan down on East 10th Street. And I was working for this company called Holmes Protection. It was like a private police, guard kind of thing. They had guys driving around in cars who were, one guy had a gun, and you would go into buildings that were an alarm. And sometimes they were, regular homes, and then other times I'm getting off the path here. So I was working at Holmes, and I would work until about midnight or 11 o'clock, and I would rush home to watch The Outer Limits. I think rush home to see The Outer Limits. I mean, back then you didn't have a video recorder, so if you didn't get to the TV in time, you missed it until the next time. So I would race home, and then one night during The Outer Limits, like a frame came up on the screen, and it was that Spock, from the Federation Trading Post, and it said, "The only Star Trek store in the galaxy." And look, Star Trek was really, really important to me while growing up. And it taught me so much about art and filmmaking and storytelling and stuff. So I was always doing Star Trek stuff on my own just for fun, drawings and writing and things like that. And so I went bonkers when I saw that. And the next day I went down to where the store was supposed to be and stood outside looking. I could see them in there working. It was like a second floor walk up with a big window. I guess Chuck Weiss, and it was 53rd and 3rd. Now think about that, 53rd and 3rd in Manhattan. That's like really prime real estate. How did that? It's hard to imagine how that worked, but anyway, there they were on 53rd and 3rd. And Chuck saw me out there, and he came down to talk to me, and we started chatting. And the thing one of the best things about Star Trek fandom, especially earlier Star Trek fandom, because now continuity is totally off the rails on Star Trek. It's harder to do this. You can meet someone, you've never met them before, and if you have the common ground of Star Trek, it's like you've known each other forever, and you could go right into a conversation and talk about stuff in the show, and it, it, so Chuck and I hit it off right away, just blathering about Star Trek. Before he knew it, I was up there, and we were talking more. And he asked me if I wanted a job, and so I quit Homes Protection like the next day, and we did this Federation trading post for it was a few years, and it was remarkable because there was nothing else like it. There wasn't even much in the way of science fiction stores in New York City yet. You'd find the odd comic book shop here and there, but it was really, science fiction was not like today, not popular like today, where you could find it everywhere. Every grandma, is wearing a Captain Kirk shirt, or some science fiction oriented thing. I mean, just look at Comic-Con, But anyway, yeah, so we ended up doing the store, and it really was a beacon for Star Trek in the city. And anybody who was doing anything Star Trek. Like when Saturday Night Live did their Star Trek episode with Belushi as Kirk, they came to us for reference and uniform. Those uniforms came from the store. Tom Snyder on the Tomorrow Show, if he was doing Star Trek, he would come to us for stuff. Mad Magazine, when they did their satire, their satires on not the earliest one, but the later on satires, they came to us for reference. So it was a great place to be if you were a Star Trek geek, science fiction fan. And, I was learning a lot about, how to put magazines together because we did the poster book that you had mentioned. I even got involved with Gold Key, Western Publishing, which was across the street. Those guys were doing the comics. And they came in the store one day and they came in like, we do the Star Trek comics, and we all burst into laughter because we always use the Star Trek comics as an example of how wrong it can go. Anyway, I'll give you a second to talk here. Go ahead, go.
Oh no, this is fantastic. And I remember when I was a kid hearing about that store in New York and wanting to go, and I never was able to, and I was bummed about that because it just sounded so awesome. It's like Star Trek.
It really was, and you know why it was? Because there was a group of people who really, 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 really loved the show. And so fans who came in, they realized that, and it became a place that people really still remember to this day. I mean, we had everything that you were able to get that was halfway decent on Star Trek. We had all the AMT models, and we had the novels, and we had, Stevens, The Making of Star Trek, which is a landmark book. Franz Joseph stuff, and then we made up the difference by having uniforms fabricated, printing our own slides, things like that. So, and fanzines. That's the other interesting thing. I mean, we had a hand in helping to disseminate fanzines. Now you have the internet. Anyone can contact, and you've got the ability to distribute your stuff like a Hollywood movie studio at this point. Anybody can do it. But back then, fanzines were like the fan internet of the day. And you had people writing their own stories and doing artwork, but to distribute it was really hard. Maybe you might go to a convention and get a table in the fanzine room. They would have a fanzine room. But what we did is we set up a thing where people from all across the country could have their fanzines sold at the store on consignment. And so I really got involved with some of the fanzines that were being done and did art for some of them. And I have friends today who were people who were doing fanzines like back in 1976 from the store. But yeah, the store was fantastic. Stephen Whitfield, Poe, Stephen Poe, came in the store one night and he looked like a Viking. He had this big red beard, and he came in and you couldn't miss him. He was like 6'3". And I remember after looking around the store a little bit, he picked up a copy of The Making of Star Trek, walked up to the counter where I was sitting and actually got up and sat on the counter and put his hand out at me like this and said, "Stephen E. Whitfield." I almost fell off my chair. But, see, if you were really into it, and you really loved that stuff, it was an incredible place to be, especially back then where it was like the desert. It was a wasteland. It was, you could find almost nothing.
That's so awesome. And my first thought was, oh, Spock, oh, Kirk. You know, I remember some of those fan scenes, but well, we're not going to go there.
What you mean like Grupp? It was Grupp,
Yeah,
and I think there was one called T Negative that were like, Kirk Spock romance stuff.
yeah, yeah. Oh my
Fantastic.
gosh. So let's talk about Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I understand you snuck on the set. Is that true?
Yeah, I was at the world premiere in Washington D.C. as well. I was the ubiquitous Doug. Um, yeah, I mean, the, the, in the time, at the time, it seemed like a long, long time since Star Trek had been canceled, but it only had been like 10 years or so. But when you're in your 20s, that seems like 100 years. Roddenberry knew how to work with the fans. He knew how to make them feel like they were part of the show and that they were important. He would write letters to fans. And if you ordered anything from Lincoln Enterprises, Gene would keep you up to date on what was happening. They even had a fan newsletter that came directly from, Lincoln, which was Roddenberry, about what was happening. And so I don't think that fans who witnessed the original run always were hopeful that Star Trek could return in some way, and Gene fed that. I mean, look, it's his creation. He's a producer. He wants to sell a show, so that kind of interest is important to him. Plus, don't think he knew exactly what he was doing when he was dealing with the fans. He knew how to make them feel a part of it. So it's a masterpiece of that as well when you look at it, that whole effort that went into building fandom by the Roddenberrys. Gene was really good at that. I was at the very first convention, in like 1971 or two in New York City. And that's where I met Gene Roddenberry the first time. I remember they showed the bloopers. No one had ever seen him before. And Gene Roddenberry actually ran the projector himself. But it was, God almighty, amazing. A journey Star Trek has kind of taken me on. Yeah, so we knew what was happening. We knew that they were talking about doing Star Trek Phase 2, which was like, it was going to be a new TV series, not a movie. And so we were following that. And at the time, Paramount really, the fans carried a lot of weight back then. I think now less so, because fans tend to they're right out there on the internet, and some of them are really cranky. And when you're working at the studio, if you're somebody from the studio and you go on the internet and you see how easily some fans can go off on whatever it is you're doing, there's always a huge number of them who hate anything you do. So you start to not take them as seriously because you go, well, you know how they could be. Back then, it was less like that. I think that the thing that really pinned everything together so that it was Gene. And then you had fans in the background like B. Joe Trimble and Joan Winston and stuff like that who were, helping to organize fandom. But it was really a much friendlier world. The internet it brings out the best and the worst in people. It's fascinating to look at every day. So you want to talk about going out to, yes, Jeff Mandel and I knew Jeff when we were doing the Federation Trading Post, and this like 14-year-old kid came in and was doing blueprints and cross sections of Star Trek ships that were just off the chain. And he was so good at it. And he taught me how to really do diagrams like that. I mean, he used to use no computers yet. So it was either rapidograph or graphic tape and stuff like that. So Jeff came in and we hit it off. And when we were reading about the movie being done, we both looked at each other and said, if we don't at least try, we'll always, you'll always regret it. Let's see if we could get out there and even if we don't have a sure way in, to go and try. And so we had this adventure where we just flew out and just took a shot. And we wrote, we called the art department. At the time, Howard Anderson had a facility on the Paramount lot. We called Howard Anderson and, bullshitted. We weren't really bullshitting. We were talking to them as fans who wanted to visit Howard Anderson. And it wasn't a lie. That was really cool. But we also knew that if we could get in there, they'd have a hard time getting us out, which is exactly the way it worked out. Jeff got an appointment to visit with Lee Cole in the Star Trek art department. And I had gotten an appointment to visit Howard Anderson. And so we had like two different passes to get on the back lot. And when we visited Howard Anderson, there was still a pencil sketch on the wall of the lithium cracking station from Where No Man Has Gone Before, if you could believe that. But like I said, it was only about 10 years. So that's not a long time, really. But when you are at that age, it's a really long time. When we went up to the Star Trek art department. Oh yeah, I mean, we wandered around the back lot because we were on the loose, and in the next to where the Roddenberry building is now, there's what they call Blue Sky. It's a big parking lot that's built on a slope that you could fill with water, and they used to do that and film, battle scenes between ships and stuff like that in there. That's where the mechanical whale and the bird of prey is in the end of Voyage Home. But we walked around and they had planet Vulcan set up in that tank. So that was, at that point, that was about all we had gotten to see of the sets. We were trying to see in the stages, but you're a little nervous about going into a stage. What if someone stops us? Truth is that and it's much harder nowadays, but back then we probably could have gone onto the stages. All you need to do is act like you belong there. If you don't look like you belong and you're looking around too much, like, wow, what's all this? Someone's going to stop you. But if you just walk in like, I got to go pick up a box of nails, you just look like you fit in, But so we visited Lee up in the art department. I think that Rick Sternbach had just finished, so he wasn't there. But Lee was there, Harold Michelson. Anyway, I had brought a portfolio and Lee wrote me a recommendation right there. I still have it. When she came and worked on Enterprise, many years later, I brought that letter in to show her what she wrote for me. And it was like, I think she was blown away that I actually still had that. But yeah, we were up there, we hung out for a while. And then this big bear of a guy came in and it was, hello, Doug. Mike. This big, his name just went right out. Mike Miner. Thank you. Mike Miner came into the art department and I recognized him. And we started chatting. And that Star Trek thing that I talked about before, how you could have a conversation with someone? Well, he recognized us for what we were. And he said, I'll show you some sets. And he took us briefly. We were in the transporter room set, bridge set, but that was about it. And then he walked us around a little bit and we talked. He was just a great guy and he made sure we got to see something. But yeah, that was my story about Paramount Backlot.
Well, I have to ask then, how did it go from you getting to sneak on a set to all of a sudden you are an Oscar-winning person to work on Next Generation? I mean, that just doesn't happen every day.
Well, first of all, getting to be on Star Trek The Next Generation, which I loved, and plus the idea that Gene Roddenberry at the time was still there. Bob had just, because I started at the beginning of third season. To go to work on a Star Trek with Gene Roddenberry was beyond belief. But the other beauty was that I got to go on the show with a lot of cred. I just come off Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy. At the time, that was like one of the biggest shows in Hollywood, and every big star in the world was in it. So I came on to the show with a lot of street cred and was treated really respectfully, like they felt like they were glad to have me there, which was incredible. But the way that happened was, I guess I had been in the business, I don't know, maybe 14 years at the point where I went on to Star Trek. And, I was a makeup artist at first. I loved prosthetic makeup, character rubber makeups. I was fascinated by that. And back in New York, which is where I'm from, I was reading everything I could find on makeup, prosthetic makeup, and there was not a whole lot. And now people who are young, who've always known the internet, they don't know how hard it was to get stuff. You had to work at it, really dig it up, which put you at an advantage if you had the wherewithal to be a digger and a hunter. So where the heck was I going with that? The mind is just like racing in so many different directions. Oh yes, so makeup. I was collecting articles on makeup. There were fanzines that, showed how to do makeup. I started collecting that and books like Richard Corson's book. And I guess there was the Richard Corson book where I really learned who Dick Smith was. He was like the greatest character makeup artist who ever lived. And my first brush with Dick Smith wasn't in person. It was when I went to see The Exorcist when it first came out. And that was a phenomenal movie. It's still one of the scariest movies ever made. And Dick had done these possession makeups on Linda Blair. And those were really scary. But what was amazing to me was that about 4 years, now remember Max von Sydow was in The Exorcist, and he plays this 86-year-old priest named Father Merrin. I see Max von Sydow in a movie about 4 years later, and he's in his 40s. I'm like, wait a minute, that guy's like 80 something. And that's when I found out that he was wearing makeup and he was rubber from here to here to here to here. And I had picked up Richard Corson's Stage Makeup, which is like one of the greatest makeup books ever. And there were 2 whole sections in there on Dick Smith. And it documented him doing makeups for Dustin Hoffman on Little Big Man, where Hoffman, and if you've never seen that movie, it's a must-see. He plays a 106-year-old Indian scout in a movie called Little Big Man. And it's this extravagant, over-the-top old age makeup. But that's where I learned about Dick Smith. And I wanted to be him. And I got invited to a Halloween party. I was working at an architectural supply in Manhattan called Charette. And the manager there invited everybody to a Halloween party. And I knew that I had enough articles I'd collected on prosthetic makeup. There was this wonderful, it was Cinemagic magazine before it was published widely. It was still a fanzine. And there was a 2-part article on how to make a Planet of the Apes foam latex appliances. And I knew I had that. So I went home, dragged everything out and said, I could do this for this party. And I'd never sculpted before. I'd never made a mold in my life, never did a makeup. And I did all of those things and had a lot of fun doing it. And then when I put the makeup on my subject for the first time, it was an uncanny supernatural feeling washed over anyone who does it, where you feel like you've created this other life. It's an amazing rush. And I knew that this was it. This was it. This is my way in. I used to see movies being made all the time on the streets of Manhattan. And that's one of the wonderful things about Manhattan. It's a big shooting location. There's always film crews and stuff around. And I was walking across the village. I was on East 10th Street walking west, and I came upon a movie crew shooting on 10th Street, and they were shooting, it was Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro. And it was De Niro in the cab, trolling down the street, following the two gals, the two prostitutes. I can't remember who it was. But anyway, I would watch these movie crews on the street and was so impressed by them. They were so well organized, and everybody knew their job and, moved to do what they needed to do without any confusion. And I always felt like I was on the wrong side of the barricade. I felt like that's where I'm supposed to be. And so I knew after I did my first makeup that this was my way into that world. I learned an awful lot from Star Trek film clips. And, Lincoln Enterprises used to sell Star Trek film clips. And Majel, basically, Gene's wife, she was going down to the where all the cans of scraps and things were for the episodes, and taking them and cutting them up, and they were putting them in envelopes and selling them to crazy people like me. And for a buck or something, you get like 25 film clips or something. As a kid, I was like decoding those film clips, looking at them and finding scenes that I recognized but were slightly different. Or there was a guy with a clapboard. They would have, you get pieces of behind the scenes. And it was like, that was where your head explodes. And you're thinking, oh my God, you're only allowed to see this square. Outside of this square are all these people who are working to make this scene. And then the making of Star Trek came out. And I'm 14 years old, and I'm reading call sheets, production memos, budgets, sketches. So all of this stuff was tying together with the film clips. And I always thought that's where I wanted to be. Of course, you got to remember, my parents grew up during the Great Depression. You don't go to Hollywood and work in Hollywood. Get your head out of the clouds, kid. You've got to have a trade. So to my parents, it was utterly crazy and impossible that I would, get a job, not just one job, but lots of jobs working in Hollywood. So yeah, that's where I wanted to go. That's where I wanted to be. That first makeup, I did that, and I showed it to a friend of mine named Doug Murray, who is a writer and used to write articles for film magazines. And I showed him my stuff. I went to his house because he had appliances from Planet of the Apes and, costumes, Charlton Heston's astronaut outfit, and, Sinbad, Harryhausen film, the costume that Sinbad wore. And so I went out to visit him, and I showed him the pictures, and he said, you know what? I just did an interview with Dick Smith. I'm going to give you his telephone number. You should call him. Turns out he lives in Larchmont, New York. That's just like 15 miles north of New York City. So now I had this telephone number. And that was some scary stuff. It took me a couple of weeks to build up the courage to call that number. But then when I got Dick on the phone, he kept me on the phone, giving me information and recipes for stuff, and sent me things in the mail. And a couple of months later, he asked me to come to work on a movie called The Hunger. It was a Tony Scott film, which is Ridley Scott's brother. It was a new wave, nouveau vampire flick. It was probably the first. It was written by Whitley Strieber, and it was probably the first of that wave of modern day vampire things. It had David Bowie, Catherine Deneuve, and I think Susan Sarandon in it. And that for me was my college of prosthetic knowledge. I was on that show for 6 months at Dick's house. Can you imagine? I was studying those pictures of his lab, and it was like I willed myself into the pictures, because the next thing I knew, I'm sitting in the lab. I was studying with magnifying glasses, working. So I was there for 6 months, and if you've seen that movie, there was no CG yet. So there were mummy suits, what we call change-o heads, puppet heads that you could articulate, of mummies. Dick did a head of an old, like decrepitude, old age puppet head that we made. Crumbling mummies. There was a crumbling mummy effect. I mean, today you would do it. It's so easy to do in a computer. Anyone practically can do it. Back then, you had to physically make all these mummies and figure out a way to get them to crumble a certain way and on cue. It was, and I think there were like 5 stages of old age for David Bowie, right up to being like 115 years old. And I got to watch Dick sculpting those, and we made all the foam latex appliances for it. So that was like the real beginning of my career, working on that. And Dick and I got to be great friends. We really liked each other. And I worked on other jobs with him, and he's my hero, still one of my heroes. I've met a lot of my heroes, a lot of them, and worked with a lot of them. Amazing. You know how people say, don't meet your heroes? That's bullshit. Meet your heroes. If you have expectations of your heroes that are out of sight, you just need to dial back. And remember, you're talking about a human being here, feet of clay. I want the feet of clay, you know? So I'll hear cranky people say, don't meet your heroes. I think that's their problem, you know, if something about the hero bothers them or offends them. So anyway, I worked with Dick Smith. That led to me hooking up with John Caglione. We hit it off, and we were both had a lot of fun. He was like my brother. And we worked together for like, you know, almost 14 years. And we did awful movies and wonderful movies. And we had a lab in Brooklyn, and I remember I was reading a copy of Variety. I saw that Warren Beatty was going to do Dick Tracy. And I'll never forget, I turned to John and I said, wow, whoever gets that job is getting the statue. Because if you know about Dick Tracy, the potential for prosthetic characters was like through the roof. There was nothing else like it. And not in a million years were we going to get that job. And even Dick Smith said, well, you'd never get that job. And it just so happened that 2 people who we'd worked with previously, Milena Canonero, costume designer we worked with on Cotton Club, and John Landau, who we worked with on FX, Making Mr. Right, Manhunter. And we got along really well. We had a lot of fun when we talked. They were both on it. And Warren was looking at the usual suspects in California: Rick Baker, Greg Canham, Rob Bottin. And, you know, you're right, he doesn't think like everybody else. And he found something unsatisfying about them. And John said, well, I got these 2 guys who, you know, I mean, for one thing, we're hungry, you know. He says, try them out. And while we were out in LA from New York, working on a Liberace TV movie that had Victor Garber as Liberace, who I now work with on the Orville. I hadn't seen him since then. Anyway, you make friends that just like, they last forever. It's like no time has passed at all. But we were out, and Landau called us, and he said, Warren wants to meet you guys. And we went up to Beatty's house on Mulholland Drive. It was just like that scene in The Incredibles, you know, where Mr. Incredible goes up to E's house, which is obviously in the Hollywood Hills. And there's that gate with the TV camera, and she goes, oh my God, you're fat. It was exactly like that. And so we went to see Warren, and he interviewed us from out of the shower in a towel, dripping wet. I'm not kidding. And I remember he came in, sat down, and said, "Okay, so what can we do?" You know, you don't usually get a question like that. They usually say, "Here's what we need you to do." Warren was like, "What can we do?" And I go, "Well, what do you mean? What could we do? You mean makeup or just overall to make it better?" He said, "No, to make it better." So anyway, I guess he liked our flavor better, and we ended up with the job. It was just against all odds, really. That's what brought us to LA to work on Dick Tracy. And so I think I just told you everything from the beginning of time.
No, this is fantastic. And before I ask my next question, I have a favor to ask you. Because first of all, you talked about meeting your heroes. You are one of mine. Absolutely. Without a doubt. I can't,
Thank you.
I'm such a horrible person when it comes to drawing and stuff that the manufacturers of Pictionary have a restraining order against me.
I'll tell you something. You should draw whether you think you can or not. That makes no difference how it turns out. There's a journey in there that takes place. Forget about the end result. Just, draw recreationally. Doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Everyone can draw. Everyone can draw. They tend to beat it out of you as a kid because you're not paying attention in class. You're doodling. And I got in lots of trouble for that as a kid. I got sent to the principal's office for drawing on my desk. They saw it as an offense instead of going, this kid could be an artist. It like never occurred to them because they are all from the generation that my parents were from. They lived through the Depression and that type of stuff just didn't happen. You don't become an artist. Oh, gee, that's nice. Have you thought about how you're going to make money? Anyway.
Yeah, well, that was me being a writer. I was always making up stories about my classmates in elementary school and getting sent to the principal's office. Like, why do you have these people on a plane and why is the plane crashing in the ocean and all that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally get you. My question, the reason I wanted to ask you real quick, what are you doing at 3:00 today?
What's going on?
Well, unfortunately, I have another interview at 12 and I don't want to stop talking to you. So I want to keep talking to you, but then can we continue at 3?
3 today I already have something I
Okay.
promised Dorothy. But look, I'm home all the time.
Well, I don't want to stop short of, because I'm absolutely loving your stories and I'm so inspired by you. Look at your calendar real quick and tell me what would work for you for us to continue this. And then I'll ask you another question for now, but
just throw out a date to me. Like I said, I haven't left the house in like 7 weeks. So I'm home all the time. I've got time. So let me know when works for you. I'm probably good with it.
How about Friday anytime after 10?
Yeah, noon.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good. All right. I'm going to make a note of that and I'll send you a Zoom invite after that.
Okay.
But let me ask you one more question now. Yeah, because man, I'm so in love with what you've done and your stories are amazing. You remind me when I was in New York last, I was walking down the street not paying attention and I turned a corner and there were all these old cars parked. I went, what? I felt like I'd stepped into like some time portal or something and they were filming a show. And it's like, this is so cool.
When I was living, I think it was like 70, I don't remember exactly, early 70s. They changed a couple of streets down on the Lower East Side into 1920s New York, I guess, for The Godfather. It was probably for Godfather 2, where Robert De Niro was walking through San Gennaro Festival. And a friend of mine had gone in there with a camera and took pictures of all the carts and things like that. Yeah, I learned so much. It just made me want it, New York is an incredible place to spend time in, especially in your formative years, because one of the influences on me that was huge was the 1964-65 New York World's Fair in Flushing, which most people know as the Men in Black buildings and that globe that the saucer crashes through.
Right, and that's where like Small World started and things like that, the Disney stuff, yeah.
And the Carousel of Progress, which I think is still in Florida. New York World's Fair was epic. I mean, I've seen other World's Fairs, and you don't have big ones anymore like you used to. Television kind of killed that. Internet kind of killed it. But you got to understand, it was 1962. They probably decided to pull the trigger on the World's Fair. World War II only ended in like 1945. So the country was rolling in dough. The rest of the world had been flattened by the war. The United States was one of the only places that was pretty much untouched. But Europe and Japan and China, all had been flattened. And so we had this huge advantage. The companies were all, imagine if one of the only places to get a car was from Detroit, practically, So they had a lot of money to spend on pavilions, and they spent it. Some of the buildings. We used the World's Fair. When I was on Star Trek, we used to sneak the World's Fair in all the time as Starfleet headquarters buildings and things like that. but the World's Fair was massively huge. Jon Favreau, you know, was hugely influenced by the World's Fair. And you'll see the fair in Iron Man 2, you know, where it's the Stark exposition and Iron Man comes in and, you know, or
That's
in
right.
Captain America, although it's the beginning of World War II, it was the 39 fair where they see Howard Stark with the anti-gravity car. Those are the fairs. And in Iron Man 2, it really figured in. He had a model of it. It really was impressive on a young mind. And, you know, General Motors had the Futurama building. That there was this epic ride, you know, where they would take you in. It was like the Haunted Mansion, but it was about the world of tomorrow. Wow. So I was hugely influenced by that. It was only up for 2 years. Now imagine if I was Walt Disney and I said, I think I'm going to build a theme park in Orlando, Disney World, and Epcot, but it's only for 2 years. In 2 years, I'm tearing it all down. Can you imagine that? Well, that's what they did with the 64, 65 New York World's Fair. They built this huge thing. And then after 2 years, took it all down. It's crazy. I have in my yard one of the street lights from the fair. I actually found one and restored it. It's in my backyard.
Oh, that is cool. I grew up in Spokane, and there was a World's Fair in '74 there.
Expo?
Yep.
Yeah, I never got to Expo. The thing I remember about it was the United States Geodesic Ball that was built for it.
Yep.
One of the things they did not take into account, which is hard to believe, was that because of its size and that it was see-through, and it had its own weather system inside. And that created a problem. Anyway, yeah, I mean, that's one I would like to have gone to. I would love to have gone to 62 Seattle, which is the reason why the 64, 65 fair was an illegal fair. You know, the World's Fairs, there's a planning committee in France. It's in Paris, and that's the World's Fair. They approve or disapprove of you having a fair. And because there had just been one in 62, they said you can't do one in New York. And Robert Moses, he was like New York's master builder at the time and did the 39 fair, said, well, we don't need you guys to do, we'll do our own fair. And so it was this illegal New York World's Fair. It was great.
Well, I had no idea about that. And I'm in Seattle, so I see the Space Needle all the time.
Oh, I love that. I wish to God somebody would make a model of that. Wouldn't that be a perfect model?
Oh, I agree.
Have a model of that.
Absolutely. I'd keep that in my house for sure. Or at least my backyard, depending on how tall it was. Let me ask you about one other film real quick, and then we'll talk about Trek on the next time. And thank you for being so flexible. I really appreciate this.
Oh, that's okay. I'm in lockdown. If
I
was on the show right now, I'd only have, you know, the weekends, and then
of course,
trying to cram so much in on the weekends.
Yeah. I have to ask you about the film FX with Brian Brown. I absolutely love your work in that because it's so integral to the story. Could you talk about that a sec?
Well, you know, it was Carl Fullerton, who was one of Dick's guys, had gotten FX, and he asked John and I if we wanted to come and work with him on it. And you know, of course, it was great fun, but it was one of those films like Mission Impossible that misinformed people about makeup that you could just like pull a mask off like that. And you know, now
you mean that's not real?
Well, people thought it was, which would, if you were a makeup artist, sometimes you would get directors who thought that you could do that, you know, that you could make a mask in your hotel room in a couple of hours. What do you mean you need 4 weeks to do this? I see it on Mission Impossible all the time. You just need your hotel room. And although later on in the newer Mission Impossibles and even in the Marvel movies, I think that in the Mission Impossible movies, he had something in a suitcase that printed the prosthetic out. you'd go to a party, you'd scan them from around the corner, and then you'd go to your hotel room and print out a prosthetic. And that was kind of interesting. You know, I was like, yeah, that definitely will happen. But then I think like in the Marvel movies, you'd have this like mesh on your face. I think it was Black Widow pulls one off in Winter Soldier. Could be Winter Soldier. But so we had to make all these mock makeup props. Like for instance, when they pull the alginate off of the character in the film, when they're casting him, that wasn't real alginate. We made it in rubber, so it would always, we could do it like 12 times in a row. But it was a fun little film. The thing I remember about it was that we worked with this physical effects guy named John Steers, who was famous for the first Star Wars movie, I think. And he was one of those big blustery guys with a beard, and some of these physical effects guys are cowboys, and they had a scene where they wanted Jerry Orbach to come around a corner. I was like, I picked up Jerry Orbach to bring him to Carl Fullerton's house. We cast the hell out of him, full body cast, heads, everything. He was what a professional. But I picked him up at his apartment in Manhattan. And, today is so amazing. If I meet somebody I never heard of before, I could go on the internet and find out almost everything about them, what they worked on, even take looks at samples of it and know who I'm talking to. Back then it was, if you didn't have it, if you found out you were picking up Jerry Orbach tomorrow morning and it wasn't in any of your books, you didn't know who he was, unless you were really into Broadway, because he was a Broadway star. And it's just I picked him up and we were chatting and he said he did, and he started, I said, well, is there anything I might have seen you in? And he starts rattling off all these Broadway shows and stuff like that. And I'm going, nope. And he goes, 20 years down the drain. But we took him and we abused him. But anyway, we had this thing where Jerry's supposed to come around the corner and be shot through the head, through his face. And John Steers was the effects guy. And he said, well, can you do it with a makeup? No, you really can't, unless it's just a bullet hole. You really want it has to be a puppet head of some kind. And how do you make that come around the corner, And I said, well, we could make a gelatin head that looked like Jerry. And we would make it on a frame that would fit on almost like a Muppet. It would fit on my shoulders and chest. And it would have shoulders of its own with the head. And I could put my arms through the sleeves and it would be like a big Jerry Orbach puppet. And they thought that sounded like a great idea. I think John Steers wasn't crazy about us because we were kind of talking about doing things they would ordinarily do, I guess. You got to be careful about stepping on people's toes. Some people, take offense. So anyway, it was just like a kind of thing where he says, well, why don't you just guys do it? There was a little annoyance about it. And I said, well, the thing is that we don't have squibs, explosives. Back then bullet hits were explosions on people. Now, and I've done it myself, CG bullet hits are a breeze. But he said, I'll give you all the squibs you want, you do it. And so I took them, I did some tests, blew them up, and made a cannon inside the Jerry Orbach head that the shoulders and the suit would be on, and filled it with squibs and stuff like that. And that I'd wear it, come around the corner, it would go, the face would be pre-scored of gelatin, and it would, it would blow out. And I left out a part. At first he didn't give us the squibs right away. We said, we'll make the gelatin and the shell and we'll bring it to you and you could do your test to blow out the face. I said, okay. And like about we gave him the gelatin and like weeks passed. And he said, we'll come down to the shop on Wednesday at 3:00. And we got there and he had forgotten all about us coming, which it gets busy, I know. But the gelatin piece that we had made was like thrown in the corner and with dirt on it and stuff like that. It was like so disrespectful. So he said, this will be a piece of cake. And he took the stuff called primer cord that used to set off bigger explosions and put it on the back of the gelatin, and we all stood back, our ears, and he hit the thing, and the gelatin head went way up in the air and came down and bounced a couple of times. Not a mark on it. Not a mark on it. It was like vibranium. It absorbed all of the energy, and it did not break. It did not tear. And that's when I said, well, look, if you'll give me the squibs, I'll set it up. And so he gave them to us. What a day that was. He gave them to us. I did a bunch of tests. Boy, I even did a video test. I don't think I have it anywhere anymore. And it worked great. And so, you know, I said, I sent them video of it, which is pretty new then. And when we were supposed to go downtown to where they were shooting, like on Canal Street, and when he saw the rig, he acted like he never saw it before. And he pitched a fit right on the street and saying, I can't put anybody in front of this. Oh, no shit. I mean, you could put a piece of glass up and shoot, you know. It was like we had been set up all along. And I never, this happened to me a couple of times in my career where I was like this far from somebody and we were screaming at each other with the veins sticking out in our neck. And here I am with John Steers and we're screaming at each other on the street. What a day.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you for thank you for being able to keep talking to me on Friday at noon Pacific.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Okay,
Right.
I'll send you the invite as soon as we're done here. And well, unfortunately, like I said, the other thing I'm working on is there's something called Virtual Thriller Fest. It's a conference for thriller writers. And John Grisham is, I'm interviewing him in about 2 minutes. So.
Cool. Well, you better get going.
Yeah. So I thank you so much. I love your stories, and I cannot wait for Friday to keep talking to you.
It'll be fun. You know, I've talked, you know, once you've lived, this is almost 40 years for me now in the business. And once you've been that long in a business like this, you get a lot of stories and they just like reel out. So,
well, I look forward to hearing some more for sure.
All right. I'll see you on Friday at noon.
All right. Thank you so much. So the first question I have for you is, you've just won an Oscar for working on Dick Tracy. How did you then end up working on Star Trek: The Next Generation?
Well, you know, I don't know if I had mentioned to you that I had opened up a line of communications with Bob Justman while I was still in New York. And I had written him. I mean, back then you either called someone or you wrote him a letter, you know. And we had a lab in Brooklyn, Red Hook, Brooklyn. And I was going crazy because they were making Star Trek and, you know, I wasn't there. And I remember my partner, John Caglione, he said, well, Doug, why don't you just give Bob a call? And I'm like, I can't call. Well, why can't I call him? I work in the business, so I just called information for the number of the Paramount switchboard and got the number, and I got the operator of Paramount. I said, in my most adult voice I could muster, this is Doug Drexler, speak to Robert H. Justman in the Star Trek office. And he just said, one moment. And the next thing you knew, I was on the phone with Bob Justman. It was just like that. And we got to be friends. And he invited me to come out and visit. This was even before there were sets yet. I went out before there were sets. And then later came out again. It was on Farpoint. It was on Farpoint I visited. And so I had a relationship already. I mean, Bob was gone by the time I got there because I got to Next Gen in like the very beginning of the third season. But basically, I was a huge fan. I've been a huge fan all my life. This is Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, you know, except no substitute. But I knew that as soon as Dick Tracy was done, I was going to go over and beg Mike Westmore to let me come work on the show. And he was amused. You know, he he was like, well, you're nominated for an Academy Award, and you could be doing features. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is it. This is it for me. Star Trek. This is where I want to be. So he had me there for like third, fourth, and fifth season, and it was, I mean, it was the best way to start anywhere, because at the time Dick Tracy was like the talk of the town, and that I came from Dick Tracy and did the makeups, and then there was a Oscar. That gave me such incredible cred with everybody. The actors. I mean, I just wasn't somebody else. I got, there was a certain amount of respect that came with that, which was beautiful, because I could be on stage. When you're a makeup artist, you live with the characters. You're in the makeup trailer, you're on stage, you're living with them. And you really, Michael Kuda had warned me that, you can't act too much like a fan, because they could be suspicious. They've had fans break into the studio and steal uniforms and all kinds of stuff like that. But I felt like, because of where I had just come from, if anyone, should be allowed to, you know, enthuse about the show, and enthuse to the actors, and enthuse. And I felt like I could get away with it, So I did. I blatantly, I blatantly acted like a fan with them, And they, it gets to be kind of a family. It's a funny thing. When you do makeup, I'm sure you've heard of Stockholm syndrome, right? Well, that's what happens when you put makeup on someone over, a lot of applications. All of a sudden, they've lost their freedom and they're sitting in your chair. And you own them. You literally own them until the project is over, the makeup is over. And so there are a lot of actors who they're happy enough at first, and then they start to hate it, and they start to hate you. But meanwhile, while they're hating you, you're looking after them, you're bringing them stuff to drink, you wipe their nose if their nose is running, you rub their shoulders, and pretty soon they're falling in love with you. And you actually fall in love with each other. But it's like Stockholm syndrome, where you fall in love with your captors. So you get very close to people when you're a makeup artist. And I went from being a fan of the show to spending my days with these characters. I mean, imagine back in 1967, if all of a sudden I was living with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I mean, that's the way it is. And for me, it's supernatural. For many of the people who are on the show, it's a job. Although there were other, fans on the show, like Mike and Denise Okuda, who were just like me. I think I loved Next Generation even more than they did, because it was, there's certain kinds of fans that react in different ways to new shows that come out. Some new shows, even if they're good, and I'm not talking about the current shows, but when we were doing Star Trek, any new show that we did was suspect. You're replacing their family and their friends with a new show, and there's pushback. When Next Generation came along, a lot of the fans hated it. We didn't have internet like we had, say, like an Enterprise, where there were communities of people that would get together with their knives out and stab you. But I remember people didn't like the Enterprise D. They didn't like that captain. He surrendered. So anyway, I came to the show as a big fan. I think that Denise was like, well, this just seems okay, but it's the original series, and it is for me too. There's nothing like the original. But I was a sucker for the show right away. So all of a sudden, it was like I had phased into another universe. I wrote something today about how I'm kind of like, Billy Pilgrim and the Kurt Vonnegut uh, story. What the hell was it called?
Slaughterhouse-Five?
Yes, Slaughterhouse-Five. You know how he was like unstuck in time, and he would just keep bouncing around time. He'd end up, during World War II, he'd end up on another planet. See, that's kind of my life. I'm like Billy Pilgrim. It's like I fall asleep and wake up and I'm standing on a different starship. I mean, I've walked the decks of so many starships in different universes. I mean, Galactica and Orville and all the different Star Treks and so many ships. And it's at this point in my life, I just have to accept that I was fated to do that all along. It's kind of in my DNA, and I'm like vibrating at this frequency that attracts, or I'm drawn. I don't know how it works. I just know that you put something out to the universe at a certain energy pattern, not to get too, new age or crystals, stuff like that. But I mean, you just take a look at me from the point where I was a little kid, where I am now, and it's like, am I 14 years old, dead on the side of the road, and I'm having hallucinations that everything could turn out like this? So to get on Star Trek, that was just mind-boggling for me. It was a dream come true. Well, I had a lot of those come true for me, but yeah, and it wouldn't have been quite the same. I'm just happy I was able to get there while Gene was still around. There was one day, I guess it was during the third season. Yeah, during the third season, I'm at the craft service table alongside the Enterprise D bridge, and it's dark, and there's the lights here and there, but it's mostly like a dark, intimate kind of cavern that you're in. And one of the ADs comes up to me and says, "Are you Doug Drexler?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I don't expect the AD to be looking for me unless there's something wrong. And she says, "Mr. Roddenberry would like to speak to you." Now, I had met Gene before, but this is the first time that I was working for him. And I'm thinking, what the hell? Am I in trouble? What's going on? And I follow her up onto the Enterprise D bridge, and Gene is sitting in the back of the D bridge in a tall director's chair. He just wanted to tell me what a fantastic job he thought we did on the makeups. And Tracy, can you imagine that? It's really rare for a producer to give you kudos, because it's almost an unwritten law that you don't compliment them too much or give them too much, because they're going to want more money or they're going to become difficult. But so there I was with Roddenberry telling me I did a great job. But for me, that rash of shows was connected directly to the original series. It didn't try to reinvent stuff. It tried to tie itself into what happened before. And I loved that about the show. That, it's like somebody who's ashamed of their past, some of the new Star Treks, the way they'll, flippantly change stuff. They're missing the magic that has made Star Trek so big by changing things. They should never go back and do Kirk and Spock again. There's only one Kirk and Spock. I'm sorry. You can't, it's not like Sherlock Holmes. You've got to keep moving forward. Star Trek is about the future. Keep moving forward, leave the past like history that the fans know that they can always count on. And that builds an unbelievable loyalty. Roddenberry knew it. A lot of producers don't like that because they'll feel they don't want to be tied down. But Gene knew that because he was always active with fandom, and so he actually, Gene, I think Gene asked Michael Kuda and Denise Okuda to do the encyclopedia to get the fact, because he realized what a powerful narcotic that was. What do I say now? Hang on, well, I got to check. Hang on one sec.
Oh, of course.
Getting stuffy in here. Let's see. Fan.
Your robot behind you's got how many fan blades on it?
I know, hey, robot, you're not doing your job. So, okay, so what do
Well,
we?
I was going to. So I was going to say I love the Akuda's Encyclopedia, and I actually wrote a book myself for CBS. It was about all the novels at that time. So I did a guide to all the novels. There was about 550 of them at that
Oh
time.
my God, it's amazing, isn't it?
Oh, it is, and I grew up with those. Grew up with the shows. Absolutely loved it. Um, hold on a second. So, why did you decide you wanted to switch hats? You're doing makeup, and then you're starting to do production design, visual effects. Why the hat switch?
For me, I can't believe people who don't. To be working in an industry like this with so much fantastic stuff, that's all interwoven, you know. I mean, if I had a shot, I'd go be an editor. If I had a shot, I'd go work in wardrobe. I would love to work in every department. It's just totally fascinating to me. And most of the people I know, they work to achieve their, career goal. Oh, I'm a makeup artist. And now you're a makeup artist for at least 40 years, your entire career. And every makeup artist I've ever known has done that. Dick Smith, you know, Rick Baker, all of them. I just loved moving around everywhere. And I was just fortunate to be able to do that. I really owe that to Star Trek because I was on the show almost 17 years. And when you're on a television show that long, where they maintain a certain group of people, everyone gets to be family. And you all end up crossing over each other working, I mean, if I'm working in makeup, I'm crossing over to the, wardrobe department. If I'm working in the art department, I'm crossing over to the wardrobe and all the other departments, and visual effects, and you get to know everyone. And sometimes you'll pitch in and help each other if you get into a jam. And so once you're in there and once everybody knows you, to move sideways, it's not that difficult if depends on you too. It can't just be your talent. I mean, I know a lot of people who are really talented who, they're just too difficult and you don't want to work with them. So, but if you're the kind of person that's good with people, have good people skills and no false pretenses and politics, I, people are naturally going to like you. And I think I'm likable. And listen, I wouldn't have been able to move to all these different departments if I wasn't. So that's really key to be able to work with other people. Yeah, I mean, when I was on stage doing makeup, that was about 14 years doing makeup for me. And Dick Tracy was, such a fantastic job. I was kind of like looking at, other things I might, makeup was feeling a little dull. I'm going to repeat this again and again. And besides, I also could see that computers were coming. I knew it. And that was really early for someone to know it. And so I started looking, what am I going to do? I mean, creatures and stuff, they're not going to be, makeup very often. They're going to be computer generated and stuff. So I thought it was also a good idea to to have different avenues I could go down. But being on stages, 14 hours, I spent a lot of time on the Enterprise. And I mean, eating and sleeping and working. And it's like being a member of the crew, the ship's crew. And you can imagine that you are sometimes. I mean, I've been standing a couple of feet from, not Kirk, Picard, Riker, and Data in the middle of a tense situation. That's a classic moment on Next Generation. And I was just a couple of feet away, feeling like a landing party member. Crazy. So yeah, I love makeup. I had a fantastic time. I really enjoy being on set. I'm sorry I don't get to do that much anymore. Although right now I'm doing graphics for Orville and I get to spend a little time on set. But geez, I love to draw. I love to sculpt. I love, I can't do one thing. I don't want to do. It's crazy. You're not getting the maximum juice out of the orange. You know what I mean? By the time I'm done, I'll know that I've wrung it out for all I was worth. You know. But yeah, Star Trek. You know, I defended Star Trek when I was a kid. I was part of the Star Trek committee. I ran the stores and did magazines, and this was Star Trek giving back to me. Star Trek has always given back to me, especially the Gene Roddenberry era of Star Trek. Gene's era was like that. He wanted people who knew the show, who knew the background of the show, on the show. Bob Justman wanted people who knew the show. Now it's not quite. I think that they don't see it as so much a bonus because they want to do their Star Trek. And I think what you have to do is you have to have people doing the shows who aren't that impressed with themselves. They've got to serve the show. The show doesn't serve them. And all the years we were on the show, we were serving the show, treating everything that had been done before as if it was history. So, yeah, you asked me about why did I change hats? I may not be done changing hats. I don't know.
Well, just for the record, I love what your group did. You kept Star Trek going, and as a fan from the original days, it was, and I 100% agree with you, especially with the newer stuff. Well, anyway. Talk to me about how designing worked. Do you get like a script and it says you need to have A and you design A, or do they say here's what A looks like and then you have to figure it out? How does this work?
I mean, usually the way everybody would get a copy of the script and you'd read through it and make notations to yourself of anything you think might come your way and start thinking about it, because Herman, who's a production designer, could come in at any minute and go, "Oh, Dougie," and say, "They got this in the upcoming script." And I could say, "Yes, Herman, I just read it." He says, "I have a meeting with Mr. Berman in 2 days. Would you do me like, a half a dozen different possibilities where we might go with this?" And I say, and I just get right on it. Sometimes there might be art that the illustrator, I've been illustrator on the show too, that the illustrator might have done, or Herman may have seen some pictures that he clipped out of a magazine that you couldn't really search on the internet yet on Deep Space Nine. On Enterprise, you had more internet, but nothing like today where I could type something in and get 10,000. I used to often leave the studio and go to the bookstore in Studio City and spend a couple of hours looking through the books because there was no instantaneous information like we have now, which is so incredible. So most of the time with stuff that I did, I was left to my own devices. They get to a certain point where they just know you're the guy to do it. They trust you to do it. I've been lucky to not have too many production designers or art directors who, pixel pluck, micromanage to death on a molecular level and can just take the joy out of everything. So my experiences have always been really good. So most of the time I'd be left to my own devices, but sometimes there might be a sketch. It's possible, or someone has an idea, and and from that point I will know that I only have a certain amount of time. The biggest enemy is spending too much time on one thing. You have to decide you're going to stop at a certain point and move on to another. See, that's the thing. If you get stuck, you don't stay with that thing you're stuck on. Put it aside, move on to the next thing. Get a couple of things under your belt, come back. You need to know how to manage your time and know what you can do. And don't labor the things. And I'll just knock out as many as I can until Herman's going to go to his meeting. And he'll usually come in towards the middle of the next day just to see where I am on it. And then he'll take them over there. One thing I learned is don't sign your work. I've never signed anything that went over to the producers. I found that, we were working, John Eves was an illustrator while I was doing graphics, and he's an incredible illustrator. And he would do they'd make him do something like 30 times. And I'd look at the drawing, I go, oh, it's done. And I see the signature. And I'm like, well, there's your problem right there. I'll bet you take your name off of it next time, it'll probably sail right through. Because I used to sail through on approvals. It's very rare that he made me do something over and over and over and over and over again. But isn't that interesting? It's the psychology of knowing, That's another interesting thing. I had a conversation with Herman Zimmerman, a production designer, about how and it depends, every producer's different, but if you have a really good idea, sometimes the best thing to do is try to give them the idea so that they think they came up with it. And then it sails through. There's some that some of them, it's just human nature. Some of them don't want you to have a good idea, which seems crazy, but and this is true no matter what you do. I don't care where you work. I don't care if you're working in a law firm, or in a pizza joint. It's all the same as far as who's the boss, who's in charge, who you're going to offend. It's like I said, you have to learn how to interact. There's so many landmines when you're working in you could be a fine artist and sit by yourself and chisel away and paint and stuff like that. But when you're working, this is commercial art, and you have to be able to work with, numerous people on something. But I've been really lucky. I've worked with some great folks.
Talk to me about being able to work on callbacks to the original series. I'm thinking Trials and Tribulations for Deep Space Nine, and of course, Jimmy Doohan coming back for Relics.
Yeah, and we also built even more of the sets for the Enterprise episode, Through a Mirror Darkly, I think it was called. It was a two-parter. And
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we built the bridge. We built 90% of it this time. It was almost a complete circle. And we even had rear projection on the view screen. And it was, to stand on that bridge and see the stars going by. Woohoo! What a thrill. The thing was that Herman always trusted me and Michael Kuda, and Denise, and they all knew that we were the authorities on the original series. I had been collecting information. I'd been training for that job since I was 13 years old, and I had been saving. Like I said, there was no internet. Right now, you go up and you could find. It's ironic that you could go and find all the reference on the original series you want now, but they're not making that ship anymore. If they go back, they change it all. When we were doing it, first, we were cutting our footage into Trials and into the Tribbles, original Tribble show, so it had to match 100%. But even if we weren't, we still would have done the bridge 100% like they did it then. We want the fans to look at we want the fans to look at it and wet themselves. And they still are. They still are rewatching it. That show is such a kick for them. I know people who love the show and are dedicated to it. When they go and they watch some of the new shows and they go back to a bridge like, one that we know of and we've seen before, and it's not the same, it's kind of offends them a little bit. It offends me. It's like in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Disney flick, the Nautilus. That is one of the greatest designs of all time by Harper Goff. The Enterprise is there with Harper Goff's Nautilus. It's one of those designs that you're just not gonna if Disney ever does 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and they don't use that design, that is it's like, what the, but you'll get directors who come in and they want to do their version, or a production designer who wants to do his version, I understand that, but it's crazy not to take advantage of the good things you've got and build on them, and I don't know where I was going with that, but I get so excited about talking about it. I
Well,
spin
we were
off.
talking about recreating the
Yeah.
sets.
So
Yeah.
I used to collect slides as a kid from Lincoln Enterprises, which was Major Roddenberry's business, and I had a huge library of images and documents and blueprints and plus anything I didn't have, we would have VHS tapes from the show and be able to take primitive. We had a big machine that all it did was print out little like Polaroids off the TV, and so we collected I had all kinds of information, collected what we didn't have, and then started working with set designers. I made foam core models. Mike made stuff, recreating and getting things so that they were done to the nth degree, so that when Bob Justman came to visit the set, and we knew he would, that it would feel like home, and also create a stir. I mean, it did create a stir. Producers and directors, not even from our own show, were coming into the stage to just sit there and look at it. It transported them. It was like sheer magic. If we had changed it, it would all have been lost. Can you imagine what a foolish thing that would have been? But yeah, it was one of the greatest thrills for us. It was a high watermark for us. I mean, to recreate every backlit graphic on the bridge, and it was really hard to believe. When they were first planning it, they wanted to do something for was it the 40th anniversary of the original series? And they had a couple of other stories in mind. One was going back to the gangster planet from Piece of the Action from the original series, and that this time, when the Enterprise first got there, they were all imitating gangsters and dressing like gangsters and gangster cars and stuff. So the next big thing that happens to the Iosians is that the Enterprise shows up, and Kirk and Spock and McCoy, and they're very imitative people. And the next time, the next time they go back to Iosha, the Federation goes back to Iosha, everyone's dressed like Kirk and Spock. It's like a giant Star Trek convention. And then what was the other one? Oh, they were thinking about a story where you might go back to the Guardian of Forever, from City Edge of Forever. And we're like, what's that? And finally, I think it may have been Ira Bear's idea originally, because Forrest Gump had just been done. And he said, well, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could put our people in that episode? And they didn't know if it was feasible on a TV budget. And Gary Hutzel, visual effects supervisor, who I ended up working with when I switched to visual effects, he knew he could do it. And he actually went and took a piece of footage from the show and put one of his guys in a Starfleet shirt and put him on the bridge. And he went over and showed the producers and said, okay, take a look at this. And they're like, yeah, it's the original series. And he's like, well, you see that guy there? That's one of my guys. I put him in there. That's when the episode was sold to the producers to do it. The thing that I never told Gary was that when he came over to the art department, he did the same thing to us. And the second this thing came on, I knew what it was. I know every frame of the original series. You can't fool me. You can't fool the Okudas. So we both knew right away that guy didn't belong there, but we made believe that we couldn't spot him because we didn't want to, rain on his parade. But that's how that got started, and it was just to retrace the footsteps of your heroes and try to, and your brain is like traveling these old tracks. You're right behind them. I remember one of the great things was that when we were doing Trials and Tribulations, I think Herman was busy doing one of the Star Trek movies, and we got involved with both, but Herman was like in charge of, and he knew the art department could pretty much run itself, the Deep Space Nine art department. so he could go and work on the feature and, just drop in every once in a while and see where it was going. But on the feature, Herman had brought in John Dwyer. Now, I don't know if you remember who John Dwyer is, but he was a set decorator on the original series. And he was still in the business. And this guy was like 6'4", 6'5". He was a giant. And, I heard that in the production office, like Roddenberry's really big too. When the two of them would be coming down the hall, you had to get out of their way because there's no more room. But there was a story in Stephen E. Whitfield's book, The Making of Star Trek, about how all the tribbles fall on Kirk. And he says, I want to know who put the tribbles in the quadrotriticale. And his voice comes from off stage saying, I don't know, but if you hum a few bars of it, I'll try and pick it up on my guitar. And that was John. I can't believe he would interrupt the scene, but maybe they were rehearsing. They probably were. You don't want to mess up the camera roll. But so that story was always in my mind, and I was making the button panels that had the plastic glowy buttons. We call them jelly beans. They look like they were actually, and I love them because they couldn't afford to go out and buy surplus. So instead, they came up with this El Cheapo idea that you can't date, where they mixed up acrylic with dyes and poured them into cocktail ice cube trays and popped them out. All of those buttons are cocktail ice out of cocktail ice cube trays. And so I had plotted out all of the panels. And if you don't get the panels right, everyone knows they're wrong. They don't know why. I made sure that the sweep of the buttons and everything was just the way Matt had it. And I've got these plexi, they had the consoles, and then there were plexi panels that went on top that had all the buttons on them. And so each station had like 3 big pieces of plexi that were curved, and I had them on the light box. And we would take a little epoxy, put it on the bottom of the light, and then put it in its position. And how sometimes epoxy kind of leaves a web behind it? If that gets on the plex, that plex is done. You throw it out and you start over. So I'm concentrating really hard to, replace these things. And all of a sudden, this voice at about 6'5" above my head says, that's just the way we did it on the original series. And I turned around and it was John Dwyer. And, you could just chalk it up to me being a total geek, but I lost my mind when I saw it was John commenting on me. It was like a ghost from 1966. I was jumping up and down around the art department, yelling to Mike. That was crazy. It's crazy. We had the best time. I have to say, we had a family unit there that was incomparable. I mean, I've been lucky, and I'm almost 40 years in the business, and I have actually gone from a lot of wonderful family groups. I worked at Dick Smith's when we had our own lab, when Gary and I were doing visual effects, in the art department on Star Trek, in the makeup department. We had a great time all the time. But that was the EA Studios stops. It was amazing. It was magic. It was magic.
That's so wonderful. I love that story. And oh man, ice cube trays to make those.
Yeah,
awesome.
they were cast out. But here's the kicker. Greg Jean made all the buttons for us. He had the original trays that they used on the old show. So he was casting them out of the real trays. There's a guy in Ticonderoga named James Cawley who built all of the original sets.
That background I have is from that set.
It is. Yes, I recognize it. When he started, James was talking to Bob Blackman, the costume designer, on the show. Bob wanted to find out what the authentic materials were for the collars and the shirts, because if you don't have the authentic material, then the weave is going to be slightly different, and it's not going to look right. Bob was smart enough to know that. And James is probably one of the foremost authorities on all of that stuff. And he was friends with Bill Tice, and Tice told him, you know, where you could get a bolt of this material and that, and you know, I mean, the collar material has a very distinctive ribbing on it. If you get it wrong, it doesn't look good. So Bob would be talking to James, and James would want to talk original series. And Bob, you know, he appreciates the original series, but he's not a geek. And he says, look, if you want to talk original series, I'll put you through to Doug Drexler in the art department. That's the guy you want to talk to. And I got a call up there, and I got James. And we hit it off right away. And at that point, he says, I'm going to build a station from the original series bridge. I was like, cool. You know, I'll help you in any way I can if I have info. And he built the elevator, turbo lift alcove, and one station. And I was pretty impressed. And I even said, when you do your episode, I'll do some shots for you, you know, never thinking he really would. And at that point, when we had leftover stuff from the Tribble show, like I had printouts that I had done of all the panels on the bridge. You never do just one set. You always do a couple of sets in case something blows up or gets wet or ruined on stage. And we had an extra set. We sent them that. We sent them whatever blueprints we had done, you know. And now he's got that. The set is, if you've never been there and you're a fan of the original series, you'll lose your mind. I mean, I've seen me, Mike, and Denise go out like, you know, at least once a year as their guest. And we take people through the set and tell them stories about Matt Jeffries and stuff like that. And everyone is a total Star Trek fan. And I don't know if we had talked earlier about there's this kind of thing where you can meet someone from the other side of the planet, and because of the continuity. See, that's another thing, because you can have a conversation with someone and talk things and debate things, and it's like they're friends you never met, and so you got a bunch of people, and you're all like-minded. But I'll tell you seriously, I mean, when people walk onto the set the first time, some people are actually in tears. It's wild. So yeah, you should try and make it out there. They've got everything, the whole thing, engineering, everything. It's absolutely amazing. I was there when Shatner came to visit once and went through the stages with Bill Shatner. I mean, can you imagine that? And I'll tell you, that guy, he takes a lot of abuse from some of his co-stars, which I find very unprofessional, although I think some of them are doing it, you know, like George Takei, he's made kind of a cottage industry out of it. And that's what actors are all about, you know, attracting attention and being interesting. So he's made kind of a little, he's kept his, you know, name out there, kept his name out there for a long time just by slicing and dicing Shatner. I've never known, I mean, anytime I've been around Shatner, he's always been, you know, really warm and friendly and wonderful. It's not the same as working on a stage, although I was on one of the movies with him, 14 hours a day. But when he was out there, he was such a delight with the fans. He took time with everybody. He didn't want to talk about him. He wanted to talk about you, what you're interested in. You know, what are you doing now? And why are you doing that? And what made you want to do that? You know, I just had to throw in something nice about him, you know. And let me throw in something nice about Gene Roddenberry. A lot of people heap abuse on him now that he's gone. And it really offends the heck out of me, especially if they're in the business. And you should really know better than to talk that way. You know, when you're on a show, it's like the captain of a ship, you know, everything, the sword is going to fall on that guy. He has a right to do it any damn way he or she pleases. And I will support that. That's what I was hired for, not to show that I'm a genius. I was hired to show that you're a genius. And I have no problem doing that, you know. Someday maybe you'll help me look like a genius. But I could never get, there are people who get cranky and you know, bitter about stuff. And it really, it's totally wrong. Although, like I said, some people like George Takei, I think he realized that he had a good thing there. by giving, Shatner shit. People expect it.
Well, for the record, one of the reasons why I'm doing this project is because I love the franchise. I love the people. I love the people who do what you do. It's all about me giving an opportunity to share the love back, as you mentioned earlier. So thank you for that. Um, and it is on my list. And if you guys are going when this is all done, this whole pandemic thing, I'm going to come too, because I would love to tour the sets with you. That would be
Yeah, you should do it with us
amazing.
because they have tour guides, but they're just kind of, usually we do the tour with me, Mike, and Denise together. So you're getting that, that that we were like the Three Musketeers on the show for so long, and we're still super close friends. We see each other regularly, and so we
That's
just
so
bounce
cool.
off each other, and we have a wonderful time, laugh a lot, and have a lot of fun, and do it all day long and feel good about it.
So when Next Generation ended, talk about your thought processes and what you decided to work on moving forward.
Well, I mean, did makeup on Next Generation for 3 years, and they decided they were going to do Deep Space Nine while TNG was still on the air. Was it 5th season? 6th season, I guess 6th season. Still had 2 more years to go. Mike Westmore was going to ask me if I would, be one of his supervisors on Deep Space Nine for makeup. Wow, another fantastic opportunity. But I really, really, really wanted to get into the art department. And I had met Mike Okuda, and we hit it off because we had that Star Trek, background. But I remember I ran into him, the Enterprise, in the corridor. We were alone, and I ran into him, and we chatted for a second. I said, "Say, Mike, what's the possibility of, sliding into the art department? I would love to." And he grabbed me by the arm and he dragged me down the corridor to the holodeck doors, which actually doubled as the shuttle bay doors. And they're real heavy. And Mike pries them apart. And inside there is Shuttle Bay 3, which is almost complete. It's a small shuttle bay. So when you go in, there's the shuttle bay. And in the shuttle bay was that shuttlecraft that they had in the, I guess it was the 4th season, the one that they had, that Scotty borrowed one in Relics when he left. It was a shuttlecraft that was built for Star Trek V. And when Star Trek V was done, they took the shuttle, they cut it down to make it shorter, and they put Enterprise D era nacelles on it. And that was sitting in the hangar bay, totally lit on the inside with all the panels and consoles blinking, and it had that door in the back. And we went up in there, and Mike sat in a pilot seat, I sat in a co-pilot seat, and you got to try to picture this. You just walk from the corridor into this hangar bay, into a shuttlecraft that's complete inside and out. Go and sit down, look out the window, see the shuttle bay. It's like the Twilight Zone. And so basically, Mike wanted to talk to me away from being in public, because if you acted too much like a fan, I told you that there's some people who might not trust you, and they had good reason to be suspicious, because they had, there were break-ins. There's some of them are still on YouTube. People would videotape their break-ins. And Mike and I are talking. He goes, well, only when someone leaves the department, right now it's fully staffed. And I stopped for a second. I said, hey, Mike, you realize that we're reenacting that scene in 2001 where they're hiding from Hal? The 2 astronauts are hiding from Hal. We were recreating that scene. And he just burst into laughter. I burst into laughter. And we were already friends, but I think that was a real bonding moment right there. Where you make a joke like that and you're both totally, amused by it. So I was still doing makeup, and there were some weeks where Mike didn't have anything for me, Westmore, and I might go and do something else. And I was I was on another job for a few days. I was looking in Variety, and I saw that they were going to do Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and I called Mike right away. And it was that show. He tried to get me onto TNG art department, but the person who was going to leave got cold feet at the last minute. But Deep Space Nine was happening, and Mike went to Herman and told him he wanted to hire me. And Herman was like, a makeup artist. Although years later, Mike told me that Herman said, I don't really like him. I met him, and Herman and I had never met. he imagined somebody else. Never met. Mike said that after the first couple of months, Herman came to him and said, Mike, you were right about Doug. So when Deep Space Nine happened, I went to the art department and started working with Mike and Denise and Herman and Jim Martin and Ricardo Delgado and so many amazing people. It was a wonderful opportunity because we were going to build everything from scratch. We had like 3 stages. We only had one computer in the department. A lot of it was hand drawn. Backlit graphics. We would have film negatives made from actual artwork that we did, blow them up large, and they'd just be black. Where it was like a film neg. The button areas were clear, and everything else was black. And by hand, talk about stone knives and bearskins. By hand, we would cut out gels that were used for lights, put spray adhesive on them, and stick them on, and totally color it using gels, and then put a piece of diffusion over the back of that. And that would, go to set. It was so much easier a few years later. Another thing that Mike did that was so mind-blowing to me, and, I told you I was on stage spending so much time on those sets, and I just studied them. And the more I looked at Mike's backlit graphics, the more amazing they were. I mean, none of it was fudged. He paid attention. Everything had a sense of purpose to it. I was just so blown away, and I so wanted to do Starfleet stuff. I love doing Starfleet stuff like that. So I was just in love with design work on the show. So wanted to be part of it. Now I was. It was this incredible opportunity. So, that's how I ended up on Deep Space Nine.
What point did the Defiant come into being, and were you part of the design on that?
Oh yeah. Well, I was still graphics. I was still doing. I did all the cutaways, all the consoles on the bridge, backlit panels, logos, detail. All the markings on the ship and that type Okudian stuff. Yeah. I don't know if Defiant was 3rd season. Maybe 3rd season. But finally, I had a Starfleet ship. I laid out every panel on the Deep Space Nine ops, and that was fun. It's unique looking, but to get to do a Starfleet, bridge, and that was a really nice. Those sets kind of they were the forerunner to the NX Enterprise bridge. There was a situation room in the back. Engineering being a split level, which is always an homage to the original series. But yeah, I had a lot to do with that. I laid out all the decks, and it was fantastic. That's where I really also got to know Gary Hutzel. At that time, they were still using physical models. And Gary knew, first, we really got along great with Gary. Gary's a very funny guy. And we knew we liked each other right away. But if he was doing a show and he ran out of budget, he knew he could come up to the art department and say, could a guy like you make a Klingon space station for a guy like me? And that's literally how he would do it. And, we would make models out of it. We had a room where we threw interesting pieces, whether they be bread machines or sewage strainers or, model kit boxes. And we could kludge together something, in as much time as we had. If they needed it in 2 hours, we do it in 2 hours. They need it in 15 minutes, we can do it. It's going to be a 15-minute job though, but I could do it. I can get you something, so I really got to know Gary really well. And and that's why he had me do a couple of, at the very end, they were doing CG, some CG on DS9. And I had been, there were only a couple of years left on Deep Space Nine, and I figured I better start thinking about something else. They're already staffed up completely on Voyager, although I did stuff for Voyager. I knew I needed a lifeboat, and I found out what CG program they were using in visual effects and picked up a copy. Mike had a copy of it in his office. It was called Lightwave. I used to go in his office and we'd chat, and this box would be there, this shrink wrap box. It was there for like a year, shrink wrap, not opened, and it had pictures of robots on it and explosions, and I would look at that, and finally one day I said, "Hey Mike, are you ever going to open this?" And he goes, "Nah, I don't want to climb the learning curve on it." I said, "Would you mind if?" And he goes, "No, take it." So I had my first copy for free, and I started working with it. And I, just like with makeup, I became obsessed with it, and was doing all kinds of learning experiments on it. And then one day I was at my computer in the office, and I felt that my spider sense started tingling. And I turned around, and Hutzel was standing behind me like this. Huh. The next day, he comes in and says, "How would you like to make a ship for me?" Now, he had been having, the thing about when CG moved in, and that's a whole nother story, that most of the guys who were doing visual effects were using physical models, and they did motion control. And if you were Gary Hutzel, you put the ship on the stick. You plugged it in. If the lights didn't work, you broke it open and fixed the lights. You lit it. You worked with a motion control guy and set up the shots, and then you did all your passes, a pass for the windows, a pass for the engines, and you were really hands-on. A guy like that, Dan Curry too. And now CG was creeping its way in. They had always said on Star Trek to like Foundation Imaging and Eden Effects that who wanted to do CG for the show. They said, we're not throwing away our stock footage. So whatever you do has to match the footage that was shot with a physical model. And then you finally started getting it. They finally started creeping into the show. And now Gary was relegated to going to production meetings with everybody, taking notes from what the producers wanted, then driving up to like Foundation Imaging, where they'd have two CG supervisors who he would explain what they wanted, give them copies of the pages, and then he'd come back in a few days. We weren't sending stuff over the internet like big stuff yet. He would actually have to come up, and if he was lucky, it would be what he asked for. But often you get someone who might be in charge of doing the shot who thought they had a better idea, and I'm just going to do this, and they'll love it. But usually what happened was that Gary would, this isn't what I asked for, so it's very frustrating for him. I'm sorry, it looks like I'm all blown out back there. Maybe I should move it. Is that better? Not the same. It's dramatic. It's like Kirk in the beginning of Wrath of Khan coming out of the light. So it was very frustrating for Gary, and he used to call me every day just to like cry on my shoulder and complain about what was going on. And so when he saw me doing CG, he asked me if I would build some stuff for him, and I was like, yeah. And he borrowed me for a couple of days. We went over to Image G, and I built some stuff and worked with him, and we had a ball. And as I was leaving, I was saying, "Gee, Gary, that was really fun. I hope we get a chance to do this again." I'll never forget. He said, "Be careful what you wish for." So when DS9 ended, when they finally did Enterprise, Gary wasn't on it. Um, he was on. He had been enlisted by Ron Moore to do Battlestar Galactica, and I watched the first season of the show. I was blown away by it. I thought that he was taking something that had started to look old hat and creaky. Ship flies from left to right, and doing these amazing shots that were like handheld in a documentary with snap zooms, and there was an immediacy to it that was mind-boggling. And so he was doing that, and he tried to get me a couple of times, and I'm like, Gary, I can't leave Enterprise. It could go for 7 years. I can't just leave. And then the show got canceled. And it wasn't ratings. There was politics involved. Les Moonves, who was part of CBS, they took over the studio. Moonves, and I think you know who he is, and Rick Berman hated each other. And it was like, I'm not calling him. And so Moonves didn't get the whole thing anyway. And he just, 86 the whole deal. We knew something was wrong when someone came in the office with a tape measure. When they come in your office and start measuring the walls, you know something's up. So when we found out the show was canceled, and we found out on the internet, I remember driving home that night, pretty glum, and thinking, man, I was on the show for like almost 17 years. I mean, that's an incredible run. I'll probably never work again. That was probably it. I used up my stash. And I got home, and Dorothy meets me at the door, and she says, Gary Hutzel left a message. And my heart actually leapt because I knew, I'm like, oh my God, he's going to ask me to come to Battlestar Galactica. And I call him up, and I get him on the phone, and he says, yeah, I heard about Enterprise. And I said, yeah. He says, but every cloud has a silver lining. And next thing I know, I was like on a plane going to Vancouver, and worked with Gary for like 13 years, doing Battlestar and Defiance and Caprica and Blood and Chrome and a whole different thing. Now I'm doing visual effects, and I was a CG supervisor for him. So it's amazing how things work out.
That's awesome. Let's talk a bit about Enterprise for a minute, because we talked about Star Trek is about moving forward. And though I liked it, I was disappointed that they didn't keep going forward. They had to go back in terms of time. So you're dealing with not moving forward yourself when you're doing the stuff for Enterprise. And also, there was a conversion in addition from CG to also HD. So I'm wondering, how did that affect your work as well?
Not at all. I mean, rendering took a little longer, but other than that, it was no impact. When we heard that they wanted to do a prequel, I thought the idea was good because they wanted to go to a time when everything was, when you first watch that first season of the original series, that sense of the unknown. And when you watch Next Generation, it was almost like they're a big ocean liner on established, ocean routes. I mean, yes, they went into the unknown too. And the Enterprise, the original Star Trek always seemed that they were out of touch on their own. I had that feeling in the beginning. And if that's what they were going for, I thought that was a good idea, especially since they weren't reinventing anybody. They weren't doing Kirk and Spock. It was a different ship, a different show, and the idea that we were going to see the beginning of it, the first, real warp-driven starship that could really move. I thought that was all a fine idea. The problem with it was that within weeks, we were seeing the same stuff, So it was a missed opportunity. I thought in the fourth season, we had Manny Koto, and he started like weaving stuff from the original series into it, and it was really looking up. I thought that was one of the best seasons we had, fourth season.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, Manny was great. I used to have a lot of trouble getting, we found out that one of our post-production supervisors was taking the art and only picking out the stuff he thought that Rick Berman would like and not showing everything. And Herman figured that out one day, he hadn't seen something. Berman hadn't seen something. And, the post-production supervisor says, "Oh yeah, it's in my desk," and he runs and gets it. Berman's going, "Oh, I see." And so because Manny was one of us, he was a geeky fan. I mean, he showed me a picture of himself in his PJs watching Kirk and Spock. So we had a good rapport, and he one day asked me to design something, and I said, "Can I send it directly to you?" And he was like, "Yeah, here's my email address." And I got into the habit of sending things directly to him, and now things were really sailing right through. There was one more layer of the onion that wasn't there. But you see, if I had been in charge of the show, I would have done it completely different than what they did, and I think it would have been more successful. What do I know? First of all, I wouldn't have even had an alien in the first 2 years of the show. You wouldn't have even seen one. There'd be rumors of aliens. Colonies would hear about encounters. When Enterprise opened up, you had the Vulcans there being really annoying, like the relatives that wouldn't leave. I hated that. Um, if I was in charge at the end of First Contact, the Vulcan would have met and they would have talked, and then the Vulcan, say it's time for us to go, and we're very happy to have met you, but this is going to be the last you will see of us, probably for a while. When you are ready, you will find us. And it would be about finding the Vulcans, and there'd be no aliens. And colonies would be slaughtered by this strange barbaric race, which turns out to be the Klingons, and in the beginning, just making your way out there is going to be a hell of a story on its own. And then it can open up, and you can meet these races that we know already, and that you've been hearing rumors about, but you didn't know that they were the Klingons. And pieces start to link up and intermingle, like the Marvel movies do, So I wish they had done that. It would have been a much better show. I liked it. A lot of the characters. I liked Archer fine. It always seemed like he was getting beat up. He was always tied to a chair getting beat up. It reminds me of I Spy. Remember I Spy? Kelly and Scotty, the two spies.
That was Robert Culp and Bill Cosby.
Robert Culp and Bill Cosby. It's still a fantastic show. That's a really interesting show. And I won't veer off too much, but they would always end up locked in a room, and they made it a running joke on the show. That show was so unique, not to get too far off the beaten path here, but imagine what they did. The production company toured around the world for the season. The first day they reported to work, every script was done. That's totally ridiculous now. It's like pages every day. They would plan out their whole season in advance, and then they would book all the flights, and they would go to country to country to country and grab every exterior with Cosby and the actors or whatever. And the camera guy, I can't remember his name, he outfitted a VW minibus with two-way windows, one-way windows on it that they had cameras, so that they would steal shots in Hong Kong, of Kelly and Scotty walking through the crowded streets, or, there'd be a shot of the two of them running across rooftops in Hong Kong where you can see the harbor. They didn't get permission for that. They just went and grabbed the shot. It's such a remarkable story. There's a good book out on it. You'd probably be fascinated by it, on the making of I Spy. I have it around here somewhere, but incredible show. I mean, they did it for all the interiors. They came back and shot those in LA, but every exterior scene, it was like, man, I mean, when you're really shooting in Hong Kong, there's just an ambiance that you can't fake it,
That is so cool. The work you guys did on Battlestar, I know you came in later, but
I came in the beginning of the second season.
okay. Wow. Seriously, wow. as someone who grew up also on that, watching that original show was okay, but I didn't fall in love with it. And I just love the update and the whole vibe that it was giving. Can you talk a bit about working on Battlestar?
Yeah, Battlestar was another freaking amazing experience. I mean, uh, Ron Moore basically took everything he learned from working for years on Star Trek and a lot of things that he couldn't do. And I mean, when Gary asked me to come to Battlestar Galactica, I said, I watched it when it first came out, and I was like, all right. I wasn't crazy about it. It was good, sort of. When I got the job, I said, I'm going to go and I'm going to get that series. I'm going to watch every single episode again. Oh my God, what a chore. I mean, it does not hold up. It does not hold up. There's a couple of good episodes, but for the most part, and they're so cheap. I mean, they use the same damn shots of the Vipers every single time, and the music would go. And it was like, God, spring for a new piece of music. I just couldn't. It was crazy. So Ron had taken this idea, which really isn't a new idea. I mean, he even goes all the way back to the Bible. Moses running from the Egyptians. It's an old story, but totally made it an adult landmark science fiction show that was just like beyond belief. And I'm amazed at how many Star Trek fans didn't give it a chance or even watch it, because there's this crazy loyalty that you have to Star Trek. With the pandemic, I've convinced a lot of people. I go, I can't, you watch it now. You've got the time, and I will refund your money if you don't. And they all come away going, oh my God, this is one of the best shows I've ever seen. And so to be on that show was just, once again, I had a spaceship downstairs. I could walk downstairs and be in this universe, and the actors and the writing and the set design. And I love that art department. I mean, I fell in love with those guys, Richard Hidolin and Doug McLean. Just incredible work. And the hangar deck with the full-size Vipers that you could get in, and it was just absolutely incredible. But to be doing visual effects on it with Gary, I mean, first of all, when you go and you work at a facility or something, they're going to be like up your ass. They're going to be watching everything you do. I knew Gary for years. I knew him for years. I met him on TNG. So it was like I could be a beginner at some things, and it would be okay. It wasn't a problem, And he would trust me more than guys who had twice the experience that I had. So I really felt like he was redefining, space opera stuff, visual effects wise, and the set extensions. And man, we did set extensions that you would never know. And this was at a time when almost everybody was saying, CG is horrible. And I could always tell, and I'm like, no, you can't. You can only tell when you can tell. You're missing the good stuff. You're not seeing it at all. We would do which finally culminated on Blood and Chrome, the Battlestar Galactica prequel with young Adama in it. There were no sets left. There's nothing left. And they came to us and they said, what if we want to do the whole show as a green screen? Can you guys put the sets around them? We're like, we've been working towards that, for a while now. And if you ever get a chance to see that, it's pretty remarkable. But, the cast was just inspired. They just blow your mind. I mean, I was brought to tears a few times. I don't know that I ever shed a tear while watching Star Trek, as wonderful as it was. But there were times I shed a tear on Battlestar Galactica. There was an episode where Adama finds out that Starbuck passed his son as a fighter pilot when he wasn't ready, and he died. And she idolizes him, Adama. And he says to her, you get out of here before I do something that we're both going to regret. And she leaves and she's in tears. And she goes out on a mission and she gets into a tangle with a Cylon raider, and they collide, and they both crash on a planet. And she finds the downed raider and opens it up and crawls inside, and it's all like guts in there, and manages to fly that thing back. It's an incredible, struggle. The episode is, and you're exhausted by the time it's over. And when she gets back, there's a scene where Adama comes. She's in the ICU, and Commander Adama comes down and he kisses her on the forehead. And I'm getting choked up right now just thinking about it. It just, it hits you right between the eyes and in the heart. And that show was so good at that. Just incredible. The other beautiful thing about working on Battlestar Galactica that was nothing like Star Trek was that, even though a lot of us were from Star Trek, on Star Trek, when you had shooting script, that's what it was. That's what it was going to be. If you wanted to change one word, somebody had to come down from the front office and listen to it and approve it. On Battlestar Galactica, when they would shoot the episode and the episode got into editorial, it was just beginning. That thing was totally malleable. They would say, hey, take Act 3 and put it where Act 2 is, flip them. And all of a sudden, it was a totally different show. And there were these happy accidents that made these amazing sequences. It wreaked havoc on the visual effects department, because if you do that at the last minute, it could change the intent of some of the shots. And the thing about the shots on BSG is that they were always story motivated. So if the story changed, you had to redo shots. It's not just ship flies from left to right. Not to say Star Trek didn't do lots of really amazing, it did, but when the show is that malleable, all of this stuff, we're at the end of the line, visual effects department, so it all culminates till you get to the end, and now we're working all night long, and waking up. We're working, and the sun is just coming up, still coming up. But that made it really thrilling. Of course, the thing that made that doable was that editorial was 2 doors down from where our visual effects guys were. And so Eric, who was a visual effects editor, if I did a shot, I could put it on a jump stick and run it down the hall and say, hey, Eric, plug this in. I want to see how it works. And you would do that, and you could go, it's not working. It needs to take, and then you go back and you could rejigger the shot and be back in an hour and plug it in. When Gary on the first season, was using Zoic, which Zoic is incredible work. The thing about Zoic is that when we did the visual effects, we were part of the show, like the art department was part of the show. Every time we change something, we don't get out the calculator and start figuring how much more you got to pay us to do it. When you would go to Zoic and you had a change, they would say, I need to get everyone together and talk about this. Then they would take half a day to do that. Then they would come back to you and they would get out the calculator, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And all of a sudden it would be, you're paying a lot more money than you thought you were going to at first. It's not their fault, but they have to be paid for their work. When we did visual effects as part of the crew, part of the show, we could do shots. There was no extra charge. We were there already. We were on a flat, a weekly thing. So we just did as much as everything that they needed. So all of a sudden that meant that the writers, it was the sky's the limit. And that's what Gary used to tell them, sky's the limit. Whatever you could imagine, just write it out. And if we could do it, we will. And it won't be, if we need a little more money, we'll run it by you and maybe we could amortize that across other episodes. But it's not going to be like through the roof, like it would be if you were dealing with a separate company, which is what you were doing when you were dealing with a Zoic or, Foundation Imaging or something like that. And this is not to criticize those guys. They're running a business. We weren't running a business. We were part of the show. We were in-house. So we were able to do these monstrous episodes that were other producers would say, you did this on a TV budget? I mean, now spend a lot of money when they do a TV show with visual effects. I don't know what the budget was like on Game of Thrones. It was like $12 million an episode or something. You know, I think that on Galactica, we were probably like 2.3 mil per episode. Oh, wow, man, beautiful. David Icke and Ron Moore, the producers, they totally wanted our ideas. If we had an idea, they wanted to know about it, and it would end up in the show. I mean, a good example is we did an episode, I think it was Razor. It was one that was released as a 2-hour movie or something. And it was the story of the Pegasus and Admiral Kane before they came upon Galactica. They were at the Scorpio shipyard when it was attacked by the Cylons. And in the script, it was something like, you know, the shot is the Scorpio space, exterior Scorpio shipyard. A bright dot comes from off screen and kabloo! It's a huge flash and everything's destroyed. I remember Kyle Toucher, who is one of the best CG camera guys I've ever seen in my life, for action. We're reading it together and we're like, oh my God, this is our chance to do Pearl Harbor. And we grab Gary and we're like, none of this dot comes from, let's do the whole attack on the Scorpio shipyard as if we're doing Pearl Harbor. And Kyle went off and prevised this whole sequence. It was actually twice as much as ended up in the show. And Ron Moore came over and looked at it and it was like, do it. And if you haven't seen that, get a chance, see the attack on the Scorpio shipyard. It is off the chain. I mean, it's like movie stuff, even today. And it was because we did things. They weren't getting charged per shot, per revision, and every time you wanted to change a little bit of something, there wasn't an extra bill, you know, attached to it. And it was a really amazing opportunity, amazing situation. Wow.
Oh, that is so cool. Before I ask you about another thing, I was curious. You're an actor. You've done a couple of cameos. So you know, it's kind of like the Hitchcock thing.
Yeah.
Well, talk
I'm
about
that guy who's on Stuck in Time. I keep showing up.
Yeah, talk about doing a cameo.
Well, I mean, of course, I'd had cameos in other goofy little things. Early in my makeup career, we did this movie, a horror movie called Chud. And it was about the cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers that lived in the sewers in New York City. They were actually homeless people because of radiation. You know? And so, you know, I cameoed, I think my chest was given a full frame. Something happens on someone's chest. And then there's a scene where these two cops are walking along and the cops stop and there's a bum sleeping there. And you see the cop's leg kick the bum's leg out of his way. That was me. But my face had never been on the show before. And when it was on TNG. I was on TNG and it was, I can't remember the name of the episode. All I can tell you is that the line producer, David Livingston, put me in the shot. He knew I was a big fan. And they sent me to wardrobe and they put me in a uniform. And when I went to stage in uniform, Brad Jacobian, who was the first AD, I guess, he saw me. It was a scene in 10 Forward. And he saw me and he goes, I'm going to bury you so deep, no one's ever going to see you. And instead, he takes me and uses me as a bridge where the camera follows me across 10 Forward. It starts on me talking to two people at the table and follows me across 10 Forward, where you find Dr. Crusher at the bar at 10 Forward. And that was my first cameo. What a thrill. I wore that uniform all day long. And I was so excited to wear it. Bob Blackman, the wardrobe designer, he knew, how I was about it. And I was in my uniform and he came in and saw me and he just stops and goes, the dream comes true. the funny thing is that I was wearing the uniform Seth MacFarlane wore. Oh, no, that was when I did my Enterprise cameo. My uniform was the one Seth MacFarlane wore when he did his cameo as an engineer on Enterprise. Little did I know that a number of years later, I'd be working for him on the Orville. But yeah, so it's a blast. I mean, you know, would I ever do anything where I actually act? I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But yeah, it's a blast to look at it and you know, see yourself as a crew person on the Enterprise. Can't beat it. I cameoed on BSG as well.
I was going to say, so did Ron Moore. So that's why I was thinking of it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a blast. It's fantastic. What a gift. When we had to go to Disney World when they were premiering. Yeah, it was for the world premiere of Dick Tracy. And so I had to take a little time off from TNG, a couple of days, to go down there for it. You know, we were in all the press interviews and stuff like that, and filming videos, interviews. And it was a big event. I mean, they had a parade down there, Hollywood Boulevard. And that the night I was arriving at Disney World was when my cameo, which was a real cameo on TNG, was going to be on. I couldn't see it, and I told them, I said, hey, you know, is there any way you guys can? And they have this big control center at the Disney MGM studio where, you know, they said, we'll tape it for you, and when you come in, we'll bring you right to the control room. And they had it on like 12 monitors on the wall. I got to watch that while I was being treated like royalty at Disney World. And boy, did I get treated like royalty at Disney World. It was, you know, when you go there and you don't pay for anything, and they take you everywhere you want to go, and they assign you one of those people in the plaid. They have a girl in a plaid outfit, you know, with a hat, and who takes you everywhere, anywhere, gets you anything you want. And it was about 1:30 in the morning, and I wanted to get some snack, and I was in the Contemporary Hotel at Disney World, and I went down into the 24-hour little restaurant there, and I'm sitting there having a cup of coffee, and I looked down and I noticed out of the corner of my eye a pair of feet, and one of those 2 feet was tapping impatiently, and I look up and there's the plaid skirt and her arms folded like this at 1:30 in the morning. It's like they must have had me microchipped. I mean, how did they know? And she's standing there with her arms crossed, and she says, you don't understand. This is my job. If I don't do my job, I could lose my job. If you need something or you want to go somewhere, you have to call me. Can you believe that?
That's a great story.
It's crazy. They microchip me.
Disney knows where you are at any given time, even now.
I'm probably still chipped right now.
So I have to say, before I ask you about how you got on Orville, I have to say that to me, this is Star Trek 2.0. The show feels like it's got the vibe of Next Generation.
Yeah.
To me, when people say, what was Star Trek like? I point to Orville. I absolutely love the show. I am bummed that it's taking so long for season 3 to come out, of course. And I have to say I was a little hesitant at first because first it was on Fox, because Fox is not great with sci-fi, as we all know. And also I thought the advertising was quite poor because they're pitching it as Family Guy in space, and it's not that at all.
Well, that's what they were hoping for, I guess.
Yeah, so talk to me about Orville.
Well, I'm really lucky to be there, I can tell you that. I feel like I'm home. They didn't really want much to do with me on Star Trek, and I had, the thing is, there are some people who managed to get in there who worked on a show before, like John Eves. But they were discouraged from bringing in people who worked. And I went through some hassles with them. I mean, there were several times I was almost on the show, and then, you know, somebody, the beginning of Discovery was chaos, and they were changing producers, and they promised, they promised Mike Okuda position, doing graphics again, and Mike lined me up, and then as soon as the post supervisor came in, he says, I want my guys in Toronto to do it, and that was done, and it was a whole tangled mess, and it just wasn't the same environment that I had worked on. It was so nice, where they wanted you if you really knew the show. It wasn't, it worked against you on the new shows. And you could, I'll admit it, that you it's easy to get your feelings hurt, I mean, part of it that I learned, and I knew anyway, is that whoever was the art director or production designer, they aren't Star Trek geeks, okay? They know the people they've worked with, and those are the people that they're going to hire. People they've worked with in the past, and they don't know who worked on the other shows. So it's nothing personal when, but you could take it personally, and I did, but mostly because I'd had such a hard time with them in several different departments. They left a bad taste in my mouth. Ultimately, I'm glad I wasn't on it. But then Orville happened. And I saw some of it, and I was like, what's going on here? I mean, they're doing us. They're basically doing us on the show. And there's not one of us there. And I took it a little personally. It bothered me at first. But, look, looking back, I know everybody on the show there. And, it's not, Seth MacFarlane knows who I am. Before I came to the show, he knows who Doug Drexler or Mike Okuda is. He's a huge geek. But the thing is that the producer doesn't usually get in the way of the art director and production designer on who they want to hire, So the only people who knew who I was, they weren't getting involved with who the production designer hired. Production designer Steven and art director Robert, they are not geeky fans. They didn't know me. And if they had known me, they probably would have called me. But I'm like, well, hey, how come nobody, I felt like I was being kept on the outside. No one was keeping me on the outside. It's just the way it works out. And you can't take those things personally. But when you're so emotionally attached to something, especially when I saw Orville and I felt like it was more in the spirit of Gene Roddenberry's show and Next Generation and the shows that we did. And as opposed to what I was seeing from the other Star Treks, which were darker and people, say fuck you. And, I heard that they use the F word in the new show a couple of times. And I was like, geez. When I would complain about it to someone, they'd say, oh, they're talking like real people. That's so terrible, mocking me. And I'm thinking, I loved these people because they were better than us. They were beyond all that stuff. That was admirable. I liked that.
100% agree.
Yeah. So it's like, how are you missing that, But when I saw Orville, it was a bright and shiny group of people. And I love that. And I felt like I had my nose pressed against the glass. And, anyway, about 7 or 8 months ago, Jeffrey Mandel, who is a graphic designer, I got him his first job on Deep Space Nine as a graphic designer. He's really worked steady in Hollywood doing graphics for movies and TV shows and stuff like that. He's really good. I met him when he was 14 years old. That's how long I've known him. He was 14, like in 1976. And brilliant guy. Did I tell you the story about how he snuck out to LA and go on the sets? The motion picture?
Yeah.
That was with Jeff. That was with Jeff. It was me and Jeff.
Okay.
Jeff had done a show with Robert Strohmeyer. Robert was on Orville. they lost their graphic artist. So there's so much time between seasons now. You have to take the next job you can. So she wasn't available anymore. Robert called Jeff and said, Jeff, are you available? And Jeff was working on something, but he said, but you know what? I've got the guy for you. And he told Robert about me. And I got an email from Robert. And I sent him, some samples of my stuff. And he was very complimentary. And he asked if I could come down and talk about working on the show. Oh, my God, I was doing that dance like I did when I got BSG, the one thing about it that kind of is difficult is that it's at 20th Century Fox, which is on the other side of the hill for me. I'm in North Hollywood. And I knew that it was going to be going in the morning, because I get there by 6:30. It's about 25 minutes. But when I go home, and usually be going home around 6 o'clock, it's like rush hour. It's like, oh, God. But the show is so worth it. It's such a cool show. I love working on a show where I feel like the person who's running it loves it. I've seen Seth MacFarlane's fan film on YouTube. Have you ever seen it?
I haven't, no.
Go type in Seth MacFarlane Star Trek fan film. There's a Star Trek fan film he made in his basement with his friends. There's a guy who loves that world. And when you're working with someone who, first of all, Seth is remarkable. And he's, to have this guy writes scripts. He directs some of the shows. He produces. He stars. He wears all those hats at the same time. Plus, he's got 2 animated shows he's doing. That is absolutely amazing. So to work for someone like that, who I know loves the show and believes in that optimistic, space opera thing, he wants to, that makes me warm all over. And also he's politically involved, and he thinks about more than himself, I like working with somebody like that. But I've, to get to work on it, the graphic designers that they had on the show for the 2 years previously are good graphic designers. But look, let's face it, I was DNA genetically engineered to do this. I was born to do it. This is what I do. I've studied it since I was a little kid. I know everything about it. I know what works. I've done maybe not thousands, but hundreds and hundreds of hours of television where I did work like this and knew how it translated to the screen. It's part of my heart and soul. When I watched the show, I saw things that I thought, could be better, graphic-wise, on it. And I came in at a time where they were upping their game. They've done some amazing new stuff for the show that was through the roof, and I've seen everything. And to be there at a time where I could actually have an impact on the show, it's perfect time to come in. So here I am. I'm working in another art department on another spaceship, another starship, with a group of people in the art department who are like family. We love each other. We laugh all day long. We play practical jokes. It's, after BSG and all my years on Star Trek ended, I was like, well, I'm never going to get an opportunity like that again. Little did I know that the universe wasn't going to let me get out that easy. I didn't want to get out. But the universe took care of me once again. This path that I'm on, it's supernatural. That's why I say sometimes I think I'm, was hit by a car when I was 14 years old, and I'm like fantasizing. They say your life passes before you, then maybe you fulfill the life you were hoping for, we're about halfway through the 3rd season when this happened. It's going to be interesting going back to see how we make movies like this, it's going to be a challenge. But you know, I'm up for the challenge, and I would be doing it with people I really, really care about. You know, on a show that I think is really, you know, fun and great. Um, I mean, yeah, when I worked in the art department on Star Trek and on Galactica too, I had a relationship with, you know, the construction department, you know, which is like a pirate ship down there. Arg, matey, you know, and they're all like manly men. And well, you have a lot of women who are working now in construction, which is great. Um, but you know, I could I I could go down to the mill and become another type of person, you know, a little more rough, maybe curse a little more, smack people on the back, you know, give them a hard time. You know, I could work. I always had a great relationship with the mill. And if you're going to be building sets and doing backlights and stuff, you want those guys to like you, not just do their job. When I was on, a good example is when I was on Deep Space Nine and we did Trials and Tribulations. Um, there's this alcove in the corridor on the original series Enterprise that has a ladder in it. And there's like a chain link, red chain link, and a sign that says environmental personnel only. Well, the night before they had taped out on the floor where the walls were going to go. And the next morning we came in, they're all up. The walls are up. And I walk over to where that alcove is, and it's supposed to have a header on it. Didn't have a header. It went straight up to the ceiling. And I'm like, and I'm thinking, oh God, I'm never going to be able to change that. The guys in the mill, they love me. They saw me looking perplexed. And they came over and said, Dougie, what is it? What's wrong? What can I do? And I would say, well, you know, I don't want to make any extra work for you guys. They had it done within an hour because I looked uncomfortable. They wouldn't take care of it. You know, you have to have that kind of, you have to be able to, you have to have good social skills. There are people who are divas or they're jerks or they don't know how to talk to someone without insult. You know, you don't get, you don't, you can't, you don't get the good stuff from people when you treat them bad. I could never understand that. You know, bosses or directors who are screamers, you think they're going to bend over backwards for you? They're not. They're going to do just what they have to do before they have to go home because you're being a jerk.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear that the environment on the Orville is like that because the love shows on screen when I'm watching it. And Seth is one of those people I would love to talk to someday. Just talk about his inspiration, you know, and because for me, I would think, why did Fox let this happen in the first place? Why did Paramount, you know? Because it is Star Trek, and it's better Star Trek than what's on CBS now.
It really is. There's mysterious things going on. I don't know. I don't understand everything or how it comes to be. I mean, look, first of all, yes, there are very strong similarities and some things that are almost exactly the same as Star Trek. But on the other hand, and I don't know how they're you know, I don't know why it's happening the way it's happening. It's crazy. On the other hand, though, you know, Star Trek, maybe MGM should sue Star Trek because they did Forbidden Planet. You know what I mean? You watch Forbidden Planet, and it's like the doctor and the captain and the, you know, I mean, it's Star Trek. So it's, you can't completely own that whole idea of a ship with a captain and a crew going on adventures, you know? I mean, if they really wanted to be, I mean, if they really wanted to press it, I guess that they could. But like I said, there are more things in heaven and earth than I dreamt of in your philosophy. I don't know. I don't know. It's fantastic. Just happy to be on it.
Oh, and I'm happy you're on it as well because I absolutely love it, and I cannot wait for this all to end, and I want to watch some more Orville.
You know what's interesting is the way that Seth started it off kind of probably selling it as a dramedy, you know. But as they got towards the end of first season and as they moved into second season, the stories still had amusing moments, but they were more serious. They're leaning the shows more towards serious, because that's what Seth really wants to do. I mean, the fun thing about Orville is that you have people being Starfleet officers, but they're a little more like if you and your friends were on the crew and how you'd poke fun at each other or say funny things, you know. I would, I mean, as far as captains, I'd love to serve with Ed Mercer. I think he's an awesome captain, you know. He's one of the most approachable starship captains ever. I mean, Kirk never played it like friend captain, especially in the first season. You know, there was that distance, the loneliness of command, you know. Picard, well, you know, he'd be your understanding dad if you had a problem or something, you needed to talk, but he was still the captain of the ship, you know. There's still an arm's length kind of thing going on. At Bakula was a little more friend captain, but the Ed Mercer character has a sense of humor about himself. Some funny stuff. Some of the lines. And Jaloja. Do you remember when the first officer has to go and they're poking fun at a mock time? You know, once a year he has to go in the Great Release, where they only urinate once a year. You know, I remember when he was telling Mercer that when Mercer first got there. He says, you know, that they only, you know, Mocklins only urinate once every year. And Ed's like, gee, I'm up 3 or 4 times a night. It's great stuff. It's great. Thrilled to be there.
My favorite line was, it's the one where the security officer is going through the simulation and all this horrible stuff is going on. And one of the characters says, you know, well, I might be pulling this out of my ass, but, and then Isaac goes, oh, please enunciate.
You know, I miss what's his name, who was the original security, what was her name? That he would, you know, Ed would say, I need you to open a jar of pickles for me. When I first got there, when she left the ship, she left a jar of pickles on his desk. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was a great.
Yeah, when I first got there, the pickle jar was still on his desk. I took some pictures of it.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. You know what's really wonderful about the Orville sets is that the starship is 2 decks. It's 2 decks. The sets are one on top of the other. When you go up those spiral staircase, that's not fake. You're really going up to another deck. You can follow the camera all the way up and go to the bridge upstairs. So it's something unique that I never had on any Star Trek starship, where there were 2 decks on top of each other. Plus the other cool thing, and I didn't realize it at first, they were shooting on stage. I had to go down there and check something in the med bay. And I go to, you know, on Star Trek, you grab the doors and pull them apart. The door was closed. I go to, like, and some guy behind me says, oh, they're pneumatic. You have to get the guy who runs the doors to open it for you. Those doors on that ship really go, for real. There's nobody back there with a cable. Then you yell, door.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, that blew my mind.
You have a little publishing career here too. I'm wondering if you could talk about some of the books you worked on.
Well, you know, when we were doing Star Trek, the merchandising was at its peak, probably when our shows were being done. I mean, there were so many novelizations, and you know, they wanted to do you know, trade paperbacks and coffee table books, and and the editor at Simon & Schuster was a big fan. And just like that thing I told you about, where if you meet another fan, well, we hit it off with her, Margaret Clark, instantly. And she had been working first with Mike and Denise on the Star Trek, not the encyclopedia, but the chronology. which I actually helped out a little bit on. I did some Photoshop stuff and helped take pictures of some models for, and when they did the they were going to do the encyclopedia, a black and white edition. I was learning how to use Adobe Illustrator, and I was kicking ass. I mean, especially when we got to the color version. I did like every illustration in the encyclopedia for Mike and Denise, and had a great time doing it. And of course, that led to other things. I did lots and lots of book covers for the novels, lots of them, lots of book covers, which was great for me because I always loved movie posters. Movie posters aren't quite, they used to be distilled, like a guy like James Bama or something like, or, do a movie poster where all these amazing moments were it was a head cheese of moments all combined into what, like the Bond posters used to be with Sean Connery. And so for me, a book cover was like a movie poster. So I really love doing that. And then, Jesus, for almost the last 20 years, almost 20 years now, I've been editing the Ships of the Line calendar, which is where the Prime timeline still lives. We don't do anything from Discovery. It's too much trouble. I tried doing pages from Discovery, and they just pixel fuck everything. I mean, and they're afraid to do anything, and it's just impossible. In our era of Star Trek, I mean, when we did the tech manual for the DS9 tech manual, oh my God, I never passed any of it by the producers. They were, yeah, do whatever you think. It wasn't, if it was on screen, they'd look at it close. But the book, they trusted us. We were all together there for a long time. But that encyclopedia, I mean, the Ships of the Line calendar, we've been turning out amazing vistas for nearly 20 years now. And it's still going. Every year that goes by, I'm like, well, this could be it. I mean, it must be selling. They don't tell me, but yeah, like the DS9 Tech Manual, never passed anything by anybody for approval. Yeah, Herman looked at it, but they utterly trusted us, and usually came to us for, well, how do you think this would work? One of the, Andre Bormanis, we were close to Andre Bormanis, who was a writer on the show Enterprise, and was he on DS9? Science advisor.
Isn't he on Orville now too?
He's on Orville. I see Andre all the time. It's fantastic. David Goodman was a writer and producer from Star Trek. He's over there. Brandon Braga.
I'm talking to Brannon on Monday. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, holy cow. We actually, in 6 months, I haven't, we've kind of seen each other from a distance, but, we haven't chatted or anything, but it's just, it really is great. Well, I mean, what's funny is that, like I said, I've been in the business going on 40 years now, and I'm pretty well known amongst fans. Whether it be from the books or podcasts or, articles I wrote, interviews for the different movies and things. And people come into the art department, and when they get to my desk, it's like, I'm like, it's like being in a circus. I'm like a monkey in the monkey house. They're thrilled to, meet me because, I mean, look, like Brandon Fayette, who's the visual effects supervisor on Orville, who's a great guy, and they're doing amazing work this year. I was riding with him in a golf cart, and he says, I was 7 when I was watching The Next Generation. So when you are that age, and you're watching shows at that age, those shows become bigger than life to you, and you fall in love with them. And the fact that you worked on things that they loved. I mean, I got to know Matt Jeffries, who was an art director on the original show, and Bob Justman, who's a producer, like they were my uncles. And I idolized those guys. I was thrilled to meet them and know them, and I meet people who treat me that way now. It's kind of crazy. And, listen, I know from Gene how important it is to make that, to be accessible to people who love your stuff or your work. I mean, I know that being in the business, there are people on, they won't even return your email or your Facebook message. They don't respond to fans at all. There are a lot of people, they don't even, not at all. Because people tell me all the time, you're somebody from the show who actually talks to me. Why wouldn't I? I mean, we're birds of a feather. First of all, you like the same stuff I do. I mean, that's how I got here. I'm one of you, you know. Um,
And you get to play with some cool stuff in the sandbox. That's for
yeah,
sure.
I do. Oh my God! I mean, how many spaceships have I trod the deck? It's incredible. I've been on numerous dedication plaques, and I've been on Klingon ships and every race you could think of, and all the different Federation ships from the different eras. And then colonial Battlestars, and sitting in a Viper, and wait till you see Orville in the third season. I can't say anything. Zip.
Shame on you.
You'll be happy. You're going to be happy. The show feels bigger.
I was going to say the two-parter with Isaac and the whole battle. Wow, that
Epic.
was so. It was completely epic. Yeah, it's
It was
like they
epic.
blew their entire budget for the entire season.
Oh man. Well, the thing about when the show was on Fox, first of all, I know that Seth isn't crazy about Fox, and you can imagine why. Making it for Hulu is so much better for the show, because when you're on a network, there's a schedule, and you can't say, well, we'll take a little more time, or this episode is really, it should be an hour and 10 minutes. You have to make it a certain. Now they've opened up how long a show can go. Some of them are longer than an hour. They don't have to feel under pressure. He could push back the date that it goes on Hulu. It's not a big deal. I think it's good for the show.
I'm so excited. And the second season, they did that. They cut the commercial time and had longer running times for the episodes, and it was brilliant.
See, well, a guy like Seth can make things like that happen. He was born under a lucky star, I'll tell you that. I mean, the talent. It's just mind-boggling. We'll be in the art department, and one of us is playing one of his albums, crooning like Frank Sinatra. And then Seth will walk by. That's the guy.
Who do I have to sacrifice to get him to come talk to me? But anyway, I'm asking.
Yeah, if I ever have an opportunity to suggest it, Tom Constantino, who's a producer editor on the show, is a real good fan liaison guy. And we're like birds of a feather. I mean, when he met me, he was gaga because he's a big fan of the shows we did. He might be a good guy to start with Tom. And when I get an opportunity, I'll mention, that maybe, you guys could chat, which could lead to, who knows, maybe.
Well, that sounds wonderful. Thank you. I am curious, why do you think Star Trek has endured for so long?
Well, I mean, I think that Gene was right, and a lot of people were right when they said that that idea of this wonderful future where everything works out and we outgrow our childhood, and that's a lot of it. It's old-fashioned type heroes. I think that Gene set a foundation for Star Trek that was based on the fans. that made them feel like they had ownership of the show. I used to get regular, Gene would send out letters. I mean, I still have a letter that said, we'll all, welcome to, they had the Star Trek Interstellar fan club. He would say, we may all be actively involved with tweaking the peacock's tail later this year. You felt like a part of it. He started going to the conventions, and they made an enemy. They made a bad guy out of NBC. That was really interesting. Something everyone could rally around. The evil empire, NBC, and you felt a part of saving the show. This created this amazing foundation of fandom where the fans were militant and felt like they owned the show. And then when the show came back, they had felt like they had a hand in it, I mean, I felt like I did. I wrote zillions of letters. I even got myself in the paper when I was, 14 years old in Newsday for doing it. When you get that involved and you feel like you're a part of it, the fans will do anything for you. And the fans had a lot of power back then. Studio was concerned, was worried about what the fans thought. And Roddenberry seemed to have, control. They felt like if Gene said, "Don't go see this," that they wouldn't go, which is what made him so powerful when they went into Next Generation. They respected the fans at the time. That's the foundation of it. What has created this larger than life, powerful show that people feel that they're in a private club was because of the unbelievable continuity that happened over the first 50 years. Every show we did came from the original series. We never violated that. Sure, the bridge should have holograms, and that's not the way it would be, but that's the place that they love. And that's history, and it should be immutable. You shouldn't be able to change it. Being able to know everything that happened, meet people, discuss it, or clue your friends in like stuff. I know shit, this is what happened. And they check into it, and it really is. And then the encyclopedia, it's all in there. They don't realize what a disservice they've done to themselves. They've cut their own noses off to spite their face by allowing directors to come in and rewrite history. That is a gigantic mistake. I think will undermine everything. It will undermine that amazing longevity and immortality that Star Trek has. Very foolish. I can't believe it. But I think this is what happens when you get people. I don't know if we spoke about this already, but one of the reasons that the Marvel stuff is so huge is because those 22 movies that the MCU made all interconnect. They all connect to each other. And when you see them all and then watch them again and see how they all interconnect, it blows your mind. Stuff you never realized. It's like a parfait. Nobody don't like parfaits. You're going through the different layers, and each layer is delightful and relates to the last layer, and it makes you feel good. It's like a favorite song where you anticipate the notes, and when those notes happen, it releases endorphins or something. And that feeling of being in the know is magic for fans. And to violate, it's like I said, that bridge is, as a piece of design work, is still fantastic, but it's old-fashioned. People are twisting knobs, and there's no holograms, and it doesn't matter. You got to treat it like that. Look, if I do Pearl Harbor, I don't give the Japanese F-15s because they're cooler. That's crazy, right? Crazy. No one would ever do that. But with Star Trek, I feel like the Marvel stuff is all interconnected. There's a continuity that runs through everything. The DC stuff changes from director to director to director. I mean, it's like you don't have any sense of continuity. That's half the fun, having that sense of continuity. Every director wants to show he can do it better than the last guy. Those are people who are serving themselves. You must serve the mythology. You could be a genius and serve the mythology. But I think that some people, I think ego gets involved. I think J.J. Abrams doesn't respect the show. He knows what he wants to do. He wants to make Star Trek more like Star Wars, obviously. Of course he does. He never liked Star Trek, It's a shame. It's a shame. I hope it gets back on track. Probably at this point, you could just have Picard wake up and it was all a bad dream. I guess they could do that.
Well, you did. I don't know if you saw today, they announced that they're going to be doing a new Pike series.
Yeah. I've pretty much given up. Watching the first JJ movie was painful. And I was like, I don't need to hurt like this. I don't need to go through this aggravation.
I thought the last movie, Beyond, was the best in terms of finally understanding what the characters were like and how they interacted with each other. But I thought the story was terrible.
Yeah. I don't know. Because of my involvement and love for it for half a century, I can't abide rewriting history like that. My attitude, like you were saying, I think that if you're going to do Star Trek, move it ahead another 100 years from Picard, redefine what's futuristic, predict the future once again, which means you don't go 400 years in the future. You figure out what they're working on now that's going to be commonplace in 50 years, and then you go for that, which is going to seem pretty futuristic and science fiction-y. And leave the past intact. There's no reason to go fucking with it. I can't understand that. It boggles my mind,
And they have to jump through so many hoops to try and line it up in a certain way, and it doesn't work, and it's kind of contrived. And yeah, no, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, real shame. It hurts. It's my heart, I'm happy to be in Orville because I feel like it's more like what I love,
And I have to 100% agree with you on that too. Thank you for the work you're doing on that. I cannot wait to see what you guys have up your sleeves
Oh, you'll be
next.
surprised. There's some surprises, some really good surprises.
Talk to me about your wife's cookbook. This sounds fascinating to me.
Well, she was the food stylist on Enterprise. When we were doing Enterprise, the producers had decided, they used to do plot exposition in the turbolifts on their way to the transporter room or whatever. Instead, they decided they were going to stop doing that. And it was going to be more like Bonanza, would sit around the breakfast table and talk about what's happening, what's going on. And so for the first time, there was a lot of food on Star Trek. And it wasn't just like cute, orange, brightly colored cubes, they had to really eat. And they were closer to our time anyway, so the food would be more traditional food. And Craig Binkley was the prop guy. And it was his job to have a food stylist come in and make the meals, And I just remember him bemoaning food stylists. He's going, Dougie, he says, either they can't grasp the concept or they can't be there on time or they can't, he was having a terrible time with it. And I said, Binky boy, have I got the girl for you? And Dorothy, my wife, is a fantastic cook. And she loves doing it. And she's a go-getter. I mean, she's up until that, then she was a production controller, control the money and do the accounting on the shows and stuff like that. And so I said, Bink, blood's thicker than water. I go, she would rather kill herself than let you or me down. I can tell you that right now. So he brought her in, and those guys were just were like a house of fire. They had so much fun. And Dorothy would make food, and I have some bloopers. The food would be so good that the actors would forget their lines, or they couldn't stop eating. It was their turn to talk, and they were like, it's hilarious. So, over the pandemic, Dorothy started doing, I do it on my phone, just videotape her preparing a meal and talking to the camera. And I'd edit it together real fast. And so she did like 5 of them so far. We had them on, And people have always been saying, you ought to write these down, And then I know Dorothy wants to do a cookbook, and she had ideas about doing the Captain's Table cookbook. That would just be her adventures, culinary adventures aboard the USS Enterprise, the NX, and talk about what the meals were in the scene. You could make it yourself, and a little behind the scenes story. One of the things I always loved about Okuda's tech manual for TNG, my favorite part was down in the little corners and stuff. He'd have a little paragraph tucked away that would just talk about behind the scenes, what happened on stage, how they handle this. And so this cookbook will have that. There've been a lot of Star Trek cookbooks. Not one of them has anything to do with Star Trek, except there's pictures from Star Trek in it, and they make believe it's a Starfleet thing. But since I've got so much time, I've been laying the pages out. I got about 35 pages laid out. I figured 2 weeks I'll have it done. This really is a behind-the-scenes book with food. They're totally different. Of course, the other beautiful thing was that anything left over came up to the art department, and we got to eat it. Dorothy would make wicked brownies. She would make brownies for Mike Westmore, and I'd see him walking around the lot with a box of brownies under his arm, eating brownies all day. Yeah,
So there's a mad rash of come January 1st trips to Weight Watchers for a lot of people. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, people always say, how come you're not 300 pounds? I have it worked out. I'm very, very strict with my diet Monday through Friday night, till Friday night. Then Friday and through Saturday, I eat anything I want. I drink margaritas. Tonight I'm getting a margarita. Mexican food, big thing of ice cream. I just like the leash is off on the weekends. During the week, very, very Spartan. So if you measure it out, you could have your cake and eat it too.
Well, I like that. Can you do Space, the Final Frontier, the whole speech?
Space, the Final Frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise, its 5-year mission. Explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before, of course. And I also know the words of the song, beyond the rim of starlight, my love is wandering in starflight. I know he'll find in star-clustered reaches, love's strange love a star woman teaches. I know his journey ends never, his Star Trek will go on forever. So tell him while he wanders his starry sea, remember me.
I'm in awe. I love. But can you give me a live long and prosper?
Live long and prosper. When they did the 2-parter with Leonard Nimoy, I was still doing makeup. So I was around all the scenes. I was standing there with Malachi Throne as the Romulan senator, Leonard Nimoy as Spock, with Picard and Data made up as Romulans. I was right there for all those scenes. Malachi ended up a great friend of mine, and we miss him incredibly. When I came in, I knew that Malachi Throne was going to be there. I'd never met him before. And when I came in the makeup trailer, he was being made up by Mike Westmore as the Romulan. And the geek that I am, I said, pleased to make your acquaintance, Commodore Mendez. And he just lit up. when I called him Commodore Mendez, because he was on the original series Mendez. And of course, he was the original voice for the Keeper in the Cage until they changed that voice. And we just hit it off. You know, when I used to love a show when I was a kid. Remember Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp?
I know the theme song for that.
Yeah. I loved it, you know, and it turned, you know, they had, Malachi was a voice. He was the narrator in different chimps. And what was his name? He was the captain on he was a doctor on the Love Boat. He was Siegfried on Get Smart. God damn it, how come I can't remember? He was one of the voices as well. And you couldn't get it on video, and somebody got me a bootleg of some, and Malachi came over, and we sat and watched Lancelot Link, Secret Chimp together. And he told me all kinds of behind-the-scenes funny stories, because they used to ad-lib the hell out of the show. They would make stuff up to fit the situation, like if the monkey got on the horse backwards. This horse has no head, you know. But yeah, to me, to see Malachi light up when I told him I had a tape of Lancelot Link, that was great.
Oh, I absolutely love that.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I have to sit down and write down everything that's happened to me eventually.
Well, actually, that was my next question to you is, are you working on a memoir, and how can I help you get that memoir out? Because I would love to work on it with you. And that's as a writer myself, that's a serious question.
Well, thank you. You know, I've been writing articles for years, which are the beginning of it. But there's a lot more that needs to be written that just goes over everything that happened. I mean, I've written lots of Star Trek articles about my times on the show, and still a lot more to tell. No, I mean, I want to. I totally want to. You know, Mike Westmore just had his book come out, Makeup Man. It's okay. It's not as charming. It could have been so much more charming. I'm telling you, if there's one thing I know, I could put together a charming story for the thing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I want to do it, and you know, and let's talk about it. You know,
that's an honest and serious. I would love to do that. And
well, let's talk about it.
All right, let's good. Let's definitely do that. But my last question to you for this project, and we can talk later. But for this, you mentioned earlier about a fan seeing something and wetting themselves because it was so cool. I'm wondering, what is that moment for you when you were working on these shows? Did you have that moment where you're like, holy cow?
Of course. Of course.
Well, I mean, that happened a lot, but what was like the one you're like, this is the one I will always remember? It's like picking your favorite child, I know, but I have to.
Yeah, the trouble is I've had so many of those moments where I'm just exploding, you know, thrilled. I mean, look at how many years I've been in the business and all the stuff I've seen, and some of the stuff that I'm witnessing on Orville. It's like I'm still having the big thrills and big kicks, you know. I mean, to have worked on Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, of course, is like a pinnacle thing for me, you know. But I mean, Battlestar is such an important thing to me. You know, we were nominated numerous times. We won a couple of times for Emmys. That's a thrill to go get an Emmy for something like that, you know. Academy Award for doing Dick Tracy. Dick Tracy's a big part of my life too, you know. There's so many. There's so many things that it's an embarrassment, you know, of fun things that have happened to me. How can it even be? How can it be? You know, when I was a kid, and I was like 13 years old, my father used to say, you know, if you put half as much time in your schoolwork as you do in that stupid television show, you'd be all right. I've taken him on tours of the Enterprise. And by this point, you know, he was there when he came out and went to the Academy Awards, you know. And at that point, he would love to tell people, when Doug wants to do something, he asks me what I think, and then he does the opposite.
I have to say, I tell my kids, always pursue your dream.
Yes,
Don't
no
let
matter what.
anything stand in your way. Yep.
And don't let anyone tell you you can't. And if they're telling you you're no good at something or you can't do something, that's your cue right there. You're on to something. They're knocking you down over something. You're on to something. That should make you go even harder. That's what I did. I knew I was onto something when they all, mocked it. I'm good. Mock it. I want to do something you think is dumb, because then I know it's good. True, totally true. Don't let anything stand in the way of your passion. Find your bliss.
I absolutely love that. Thank you so much. And I'm going to stop recording here. This has been phenomenal and a dream.
For
honestly.
me too. It's
Thank
great
you.
to talk to you. My pleasure.